Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Ivan Ozerets.
Hello. Yep.
How do you say it?
Ivan Ozerets.
Ozerets,
If
good.
you want to do it in a Russian accent, you go Ivan Ozerets.
Ivan is an idiot.
Yeah.
Say it one more time.
Ivan Ozerets.
We're going to call someone else up here shortly with a Russian name, Nick Nemeroff.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be great. But let you know, first of all, podcast 169. Thanks for listening. We're coming to you from Wintergreen Resort, Wintergreen, Virginia. Yesterday, Yvonne and I had a tour of the White House. Give me that. That was kind of cool. This is going to be cool. Call Nick up. Great passion for tennis. He started his tennis with Jim Klein, Doylestown Tennis. And his story is in New York City. Look up Court 16 Tennis, New York City, Court 16. And he's going to tell us about his business, his background in tennis, but he's an expert on the big three. Can you name the big three?
Oof, tough one, yes. We got Nadal, we got Djokovic, we got Federer. Actually, I'm a proponent of people used to say big four because Murray was in the mix.
Yeah, you got to love Murray.
But I'm a big Wawrinka fan. And if there's a big four, there's a big five. They won the same amount of majors. So, I mean, there's an argument there, but there's a big three, yeah.
I like the fact with Federer, smart guy, he was asked to be, he had three wishes. One, Nadal would have played soccer. Two, he had Wawrinka's backhand.
Mm-hmm.
And three, he'd save his wish.
Yeah.
Save his wish. But no, I study, he's made an in-depth study of the big three, but let me call him up. New York City, that's a difficult place to find court time. Ring one. GreatBase Tennis Podcast guest, Nick Nemeroff. Another person who loves tennis.
Hello?
Good afternoon, Nick.
Nick, how are you?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Yeah, we just went through the Russian pronunciation of your last name. Go ahead.
Nemeroff?
Nemeroff.
How would you say it, Ivan?
Well, Nemeroff, yeah, Nemeroff. You could add a little Russian twist to it, but there are maybe a couple of different pronunciations.
Yeah, I'll let you do that one, Ivan.
Nemeroff or Nemerov? Nemerov.
It used to be Nemerovsky.
Oh wow.
And then it was cut down.
Oh, so Nemerovsky. So Nemerov.
Yeah.
Nick Nemeroff.
Exactly.
Okay.
But we can't forget your Italian heritage. Tell us about that.
Yeah, right, exactly.
With gotta love the Italians. Spaghetti. With tell us about your story. We start generally with our guests. Where did your passion for tennis begin? I mentioned it before we started with Doylestown, but go tell us a little bit about your story in tennis. Your start.
Yeah, well, growing up, I played soccer from the age of 4 to 12, and in 2004, I lived in Florida in a place called Punta Gorda. So my family, we were in a Category 4, nearly 5 hurricane. And this hurricane really wrecked our town pretty bad. And my parents had our family move from Florida to Doylestown, Pennsylvania. At that point, I did a summer camp that had a ton of different sports. And I took an interest in playing tennis at the camp. And I remember the first match I ever played at the camp, I was playing doubles. And I let a ball go into the alley and then called it out. And then I was like, yes, we won the point. And my partner was like, dude, that was it. We're playing doubles now. And that was the first match I ever remember playing. A few months later, I was like, all right, I got to learn how to play. I got to learn how to play better. So I started taking lessons at Doylestown Tennis Club, run by Jim Klein, who's been on your podcast. Took lessons from Jim and Ryan Reedy of 2 Minute Tennis and a few other great instructors there, all under, Vic Braden's philosophy. I know obviously Jim trained under you as well, Steve, and, everything that we learned was rooted in that. And I started playing once a week for about 6 months, quit soccer, and started just gradually upping the amount that I played each week. I just became obsessed, and within like a year and a half, I couldn't do anything else. And all I wanted to do was play tennis.
Caught the bug.
Exactly.
Addicted.
Mm-hmm.
With so you played through juniors and through college. Or I should say through juniors and high school. Tennis was number one. You didn't play soccer after that?
Yeah, I didn't play any soccer. Started playing tournaments probably 2.5 years after, starting to play. I lost my first 2 matches, 6-0, 6-0. I remember just being so miserable after those matches, but also at the same time having this feeling like, all right, I'm really upset, but I'm also really driven at the same time to start doing better. It took me almost a whole year to win a set even in a match. And funny enough, I won the first match. After not winning a set for a year, I won the first match I ever played 6-0, 6-0 against someone who was playing their first tournament. So it was a good way for me to get my first win. And then, I played juniors, not at a super high level, but I played juniors, played high school tennis. And I also started, when I was in high school, I started really watching a lot of pro tennis, and I got really fascinated by the pro tour. Started doing some writing for a site called Bleacher Report in, I think, 2011. Just, they would allow anyone to write. So I started doing some writing about matches and players and tournaments. And that led to me writing more about tennis when I was in college. And I wrote for a few tennis, one tennis website, one tennis magazine. Had the opportunity to interview Michael Chang. I interviewed Billie Jean King. I interviewed Vic as well. Jim helped me set up an interview with Vic. Wow. I interviewed Francis Tiafoe. I interviewed, I didn't interview, but I was part of a press conference with Federer, which was really cool. And Dimitrov. So that was, as like a 20, how old was I at that point? I was like 20, 22. So that was like a pretty cool experience for being like just a young college kid. And yeah, so just, I think I was a lot more passionate about tennis than I was good at it. People always ask me who I teach, like how good are you? Like, could you be a pro? And I always laugh when they say, I'm like, I'm good enough to teach you. But I won't be going on the pro tour anytime soon.
Did you study journalism after high school or even during high school?
Yeah, not during high school, but my first year at NYU, I took journalism classes. And, I realized at that point, the only thing that I would want to write about is tennis. And after that, I switched over to becoming a politics major. But while I was at NYU, the whole time I knew, like, I need to do something with tennis, whether it's writing about tennis, coaching tennis. I've got to do something with tennis. I'm sitting in my college classes, either, watching matches, reading articles. I was watching, I remember in 2015, I was a junior. I was watching GreatBase videos all the time. That would be in class, in between classes. So I knew that, tennis was my calling for sure.
With NYU, I know it's a difficulty to get in because I have many students who've applied who've been rejected. But New York City, that's a pretty tough place to get court time, correct?
Oh my God. Yeah, it is. So the place that I play at most regularly, which is about a 6-minute walk from my house, and I live in this neighborhood because of it, the sign-up process is they bring a sheet out every morning, a park attendant at 7:30 in the morning, and then at that point you sign up for time slots between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Obviously now it's a little bit cut down, but in the best weather of the year, those lines start forming. I'm not kidding you, at 5:45 a.m. and there will be 60, 70 people, maybe even more in the line to get a court. So people are going to sacrifice sleep. They're going to sacrifice, their mornings to get a court. It's very difficult. A lot of people want to play. There's limited resources. There's a place called Hudson River Park where people are known. I've done it. Wait like several hours. We're talking like 3-4 hours just to get a court and you can only play for an hour.
Wow.
In the 70s.
Yeah, so it is very difficult.
In the 1970s, I was a perennial tennis bum of Boca Raton, Florida, and you had to wait, you'd have to be at the park before it opened up, and there would be a line waiting to play.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's what this is. What
about the spread? I mean, is it 6 months in, 6 months out? What would you call the outdoor season? What months?
You mean like how are people when people are playing outside?
Yeah. So when does indoor season where you?
Yeah. Honestly, I really think like the outdoor season probably starts like, let's say like end of April, beginning of May, and then I really feel like it starts really slowing down about now, like beginning of November. So like May to November. So yeah, like 6 months. But there's some hardcore people, including myself, who it's like it doesn't matter how cold it is, as long as there's not a lot of wind, we'll go outside. Like I played in like 20-degree weather afterwards, not being able to tie my shoe, and that's actually when you can get the most court time because no one's there to kick you off in that kind of weather.
So before going to college, you must have actually taught for gym as well, correct?
Yeah, taught for gym, mainly like younger kids. The early childhood development. So I did that. Some adults, but yeah, pretty much just under the tutelage of Jim and Ryan and the two other coaches there named Corey and Mary Lou.
Yeah, Corey, Mary Lou, it's amazing. Jim on our podcast, the longevity, that's
incredible.
A tribute to him and how long people have worked for him. It's great. I mean,
absolutely.
You're talking decades, right?
It's insane. Yeah, it's crazy.
Do you get back to Doylestown much, or you have family?
Yeah, I just came from there today. Yeah, my parents still live there. Yeah, I'll go to. I didn't go to the club this weekend, but I'll go to the club and play. Talk to Jim. I mean, Ryan's not working in there anymore, but talk to Corey, talk to Mary Lou. But yeah, I'll go there maybe like once a month, once every month and a half. It's great to just be able to go there and just get on a court. I mean, it's just like, if you live in Doylestown, it doesn't mean anything to you. But coming from New York, it's such a luxury just to have 100 tennis courts within a 10-minute, distance from where my parents live. And the fact that there's no waiting and you can play as long as you want, it's crazy. It just feels amazing to be able to do that.
No, we have many things to cover, but why don't you give a shout out to Ryan Reedy, the listeners, if they haven't already looked at his program, 2-Minute Tennis. Why don't you give him a commercial, pump his tires?
Yeah, I mean, I would say learning to become a better coach in the last 5 or 6 years. I would say by far the two channels I've looked at the most are GreatBase and 2-Minute Tennis, and I feel like you guys obviously are, you're both dealing with VIX information. And I've learned so much from each. So if anyone listening to this is trying to become a better coach, you should definitely go on YouTube and watch GreatBase Tennis and 2-Minute Tennis.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. With New York City, tell us about your business, Court 16, the evolution of that from being a college student and how your time has evolved and what you've built.
Yeah. So it's a cool story of how I first started working at Court 16. I was trying to become certified as a tennis coach because I didn't know what I was going to be doing after NYU. So I was like, all right, if I go back to coach with Jim, I'm not going to need any type of certifications, but maybe I want to go somewhere else. So I was getting certified by the USPTA, and I had to do one more 10 and under clinic. And I'm very on point with being on time. Like I hate being late. And I was in Pennsylvania. The clinic was at 9 a.m. I was running late. I was on time, but then I couldn't find the courts when I had gotten to this big park called Riverside Park because they had 2 sets of tennis courts, and I went to the wrong one. And I kept asking. And after a while, I almost left because no one knew where these courts were, where I had to go. Let me ask one more person. And this guy's like, oh yeah, you just have to go here. And I was already 15 minutes late at that point. But that's where I met my, current boss and owner of Court 16. If I had not asked this one other dude, where to go, I would have never met him. I wouldn't be coaching at this place for the last 10 years. And yeah, so that was obviously a very fortunate event. But yeah, when I first started coaching at the club, my first day of coaching there, I show up, I teach one student for 30 minutes, and then I left. And since that point, we've expanded. We now have 3 locations in Queens, one in Manhattan, and one in Brooklyn. And we just opened 2 brand new facilities, one in downtown Brooklyn at a building called the City Point Building, which is a really well-known building. It's not a place you would imagine for there to be a tennis club. It's inside a shopping mall. so it's a cool place for people to come play tennis, and they can go shopping or groceries or like go get a beer. There's like a brewery downstairs. So it's definitely a cool place to have a club. And then the club in Manhattan is actually in like a big office building at the bottom of an office building. But getting space in Manhattan, is not easy. So now we have 3 clubs, and we have about 25, 30 coaches between the clubs. And my job is just to manage the tennis operations between the 3 clubs and to make sure everything is in harmony.
Yeah, I need to check it out. I know at one time we talked about, I was going to go by and meet with you, but it was the pandemic and what happened with that. It was crazy times. But
right,
go back, Court 16. It's a unique name. Tell us the story behind the story.
Yeah, so the owner, Anthony, he grew up in Belgium playing at a club that had many courts, and the court he always practiced on was court number 16. And that was his court that he had always trained on, and that's how he came up with the name.
And now all your sites they're all called Court 16?
Yeah, Court 16 Brooklyn, Court 16 Manhattan, Court 16 Long Island City, the one in Queens.
Oh, that's great. And you all-encompassing program, you work with all levels? I mean, I know I've been on your website.
Sure. I would say the highest level that we have coming in is probably, and it's not coming in that often, but it's like a 4.5. So I would say, like, for adults at least, we work with like people who are 4.0 and below. And then for kids, we work with, obviously beginners all the way up to like kids who are just starting to play tournaments and get their feet wet with tournaments. So we're definitely not like other clubs in the city, like a John McEnroe, that is very, what they call, high performance, where you have kids who are playing 4 or 5 days a week, several hours a day, really training for tournaments. That's not what we do.
And what about court space? Do you break it up with group dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, that's the toughest thing in New York. So in the Brooklyn location, we have one full-size court. We have one court that's a 60-foot court that we use more for beginners and what we call advanced beginners. And then we have 5 pickleball-sized courts, which we then use for, obviously, pickleball. And then we use for kids as well. So, kids who are younger and just learning. Ideally you would have a whole fleet of full-size courts, but the reality is in New York, just getting space is very difficult. But we do group lessons, private lessons. We started doing, one lesson type of lesson we started doing last like year and a half or so, or private lessons using a ball machine where the ball machine is feeding the ball and I'll stand on the side of the court with the player. And, I think it's been great because I can really just focus on their technique and I can film them and slow things down and show them, for the most part, I think the number one issue that with people that I teach is that they don't close their racket face. So most of the time, we're talking about that. And I'm able to show them that. They're having trouble hitting spin, but with this ball machine that we have, we've created a system where you hit the ball machine against, a curtain or a backstop, and then it goes into essentially like a gutter or a funnel, and it goes right back into the machine. So then there's no ball pickup. So you're saving a lot of time, which is great. And you can obviously focus more time on getting better. And I think in New York, a lot of people are only playing once or twice a week. So that's really helpful.
That's great. I haven't heard of that kind of system.
Yeah. It's definitely like an original thing.
With marketing, as far as marketing, you probably actually go back. What was your final degree at NYU?
It was politics and public policy, essentially like U.S. government, which now I don't even think about at all, and I try not to think about.
I was just going to ask your time in school. Was there ideas from your education or insights, things that helped you out once you got started in tennis? I mean, obviously you had such a great background with Jim and his staff.
No, there really wasn't. Honestly, what helped me was focusing on tennis while I was in class.
Tell us about the big 3.
Mm-hmm.
Your Twitter account. Why don't you start there?
Yeah. I mean, COVID happened. Well, I started the account in 2019. I was like, all right, I've been watching and following these guys nonstop the last, 2019 would have been like 12 years, 13 years. No one's really created a Twitter account about their, about them. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. It was right after the Federer Djokovic 2019 Wimbledon final where Federer had those match points. Excuse me. And I didn't really do much with it. And then COVID happened and our clubs were closed for a few months. And I was doing some work to prepare for the opening, but I had more free time on my hands than usual. So I was, like, what am I going to do? And I was like, all right, let me pick this back up. And I started realizing that people were really into the stats behind the big three. And for me, just finding cool, innovative, unique stats. And it started to allow the page to obtain good traction. I think in the first 5 months, I gained like 5,000 followers. Now it's all the way up to, here we are like 3 years later, like 30,000. And I've got some, well-known people within the tennis world, like Tracy Austin, Pam Shriver, Chris Fowler, a good amount of, well-known people, former Prime Minister of Serbia who follow the account. So it's been cool to see it get that kind of traction, but we've also added technical insights, analyzing old matches, also offering, my opinions on what's happening during the match, my analysis during the match, which really helps the page grow. What for me is, truthfully, that is part of my goal, is to really grow the page, because I am in the process of writing a book about the big three. So I'd like my audience to be as big as possible once the book is finished. So I'd be lying if I said I, wasn't trying to just continually expand the page as far as audience, and that's like a big motivation.
I know the focus is on the big three, but how about some of the interviews you did beforehand? How would listeners, is there ways to find out, read about your interviews with, Billie Jean King, Francis Tiafoe, and others?
Yeah, the Billie Jean King one I did for a website called the Tennis Island. So if they wanted to read the article I wrote about it, they'd have to type my name, last name Nemeroff, Tennis Island, and they would find it. And then the other ones were Tennis View magazine. So those interviews are all there. If they just look up my name and with the player, they could find those interviews.
Yeah, we could connect after the podcast and perhaps post those again for you.
Yeah, with the fandom, I'm a big Federer fan. I'm a big three fan as well. I just enjoy watching him. I remember being younger, and I'm not that old personally. I'm 24, so I don't remember. I don't remember much. I think the first final I remember was the 2008 final, when everyone was going crazy in the Wimbledon final, Fed and Rafa. And I followed off and on. I was a big Fed fan. I loved the rivalry. Respected Djokovic. And, I took a break from tennis for a little bit in my teenage years, but then I got back into it solely because of Federer and his run in 2017, where, it looked like he was down and out. Everybody was counting him out. He's like, okay, he's going to retire. And he came back and won 3 majors in the span of, a year and a half, and the Sunshine Double. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I kind of, dove back into it and he was like the spark. When did it start with you?
As far as just supporting the big three?
Yeah. Like, following them, being interested in their stats, their success, their numbers.
I've always, when I started watching tennis was 2006. The first major final I remember watching was 2006 Australian Open final, which was Federer against Baghdadis. All throughout high school, and then college, I had my own personal Twitter account, and I would tweet a lot of stats from that account, but that was more about tennis in general, and it was a lot broader. And then I just essentially cycled that, or just funneled that into a page about the big three. And I've always been interested in the stats and, what the stats show and, the stories that the stats convey. So it's really fun. There's still stats. I'm always like, now I'm like, I use a resource called Tennis Abstract very frequently, which I cannot say more things about how unbelievable this is as a resource. If you're listening to this podcast and have never checked it out, you should go on a Tennis Abstract created by this guy named Jeff Sackman. It's a brilliant website. And let's say you type in Djokovic, you will find any conceivable stat that you would want to know, you're going to find on this website. So essentially you can track like everything by year. You can track level. You can track, oh, what did Djokovic do in Masters 1000 events when he lost the first set? What did he do against one-handed backhanders in Grand Slams on clay? So there's just so many things that you can find, so many cool stats, head-to-head, just anything you could think of, you're going to find on this. And that's helped me a lot with the Twitter account to find really cool stats.
Are you a fan of one over the other, or you just love all three? I mean, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, everyone asks me that. So, I mean, to be honest, when I was first growing up playing tennis, my dad was a Federer fan. So I started, liking Federer because my dad liked Federer. Throughout high school, I would say I was more of a Federer fan. And then when I started coaching, that's when I really stopped being so much of a fan and really started thinking more about like, okay, what are they doing technically, tactically, mentally, and really starting examining that side. And I just began to appreciate all of them. And yeah, there's things that all of them have done that I love, and there's things that all of them have done that I'm not a huge fan of. And at this point, it's just like, I'm pretty neutral about the whole thing. And I think I've also tried to become more neutral as I've had this Twitter page.
Why do you think they've been so successful? Why haven't others been able to break in?
Great. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think what I just thought of is this match that Djokovic played against Rublev on Saturday.
Yeah, I saw that.
Where it was, Rublev played unbelievable and Djokovic was sick, not feeling 100%, played a long match the day before. And it looked like Rublev had a good chance of winning, and Djokovic just, was better in the end. And I think one thing I thought about in the match is just how many long baseline points that Rublev played with Djokovic and his unwillingness to move forward. He's able to end some of these long baseline rallies with big shots, but then as you do it, trying to do it for several hours, it's a different thing doing it in the first set than it is in the third set. So I think that's one big reason is lack of willingness to change tactics. Like, okay, you're playing Djokovic, and Jim and Ryan and I have talked about this a ton, and you're playing this guy who's clearly, and you can say the same for Nadal and Federer, who's clearly better than everyone else from the baseline. And everyone tries to beat them at what they're good at. They don't try to bring them in. They don't try to come in. There's definitely a lack of variety thrown at them. Like Gasquet, he's like 3 and 50 against them combined, and you never seen him try anything different. And I've loved watching Gasquet, but like watching him against these three, it's been a huge struggle. So I think that's one reason. I think also with Djokovic, his technique has just become so strong, and so solid every single shot, maybe except overhead. But like every shot has become so solid. The improvement of his serve, the improvement of his forehand. I just think that in long matches, you just need to have something that is repeatable, match in, match out, 7 matches, 2 weeks, and Djokovic has that, and of course Nadal and Federer have that as well. And they just had more ways to win. They just had more ways to win, and their opponents failed to come up with creative ways to diffuse what they were doing. Not everyone had like 150-mile-an-hour serve like Andy Roddick. So, winning matches against these guys was so difficult. And I would say the number one cause outside of the fact of how good they are is just lack of willingness to do something different.
Yeah, Vic Braden used to say that Bjorn Borg was a better Vilas. And that if you play the guy 20 times and you just don't make it a baseline to baseline match they're not going forward. Saying, well, I got to take my chances against these guys. If someone's a better baseline, or another Bradenism is you might as well just mail in the scores. If you're playing somebody who's better than you from the baseline and that's your only option, again, just mail in the scores. The match is over. Is that you've got to, I like what you said, try something different.
Yeah, this is a very highly debated thing on my Twitter page, because when I post this, and I post it frequently, people get annoyed by it, but because they're like, oh, is that your only thing? And what they say is, if you go to the net, they're going to pass you. And I'm like, well, if you don't do it, you're never going to know. And a lot of these players aren't even giving it an attempt. And secondly, it's like, all right, well, maybe you still will lose, but at least you're not going to lose in the same way that every single other player did. And at least you're going to make the game look a little bit different to these guys who are so comfortable with the same patterns from the baseline over and over and over.
I think with Federer, I don't think there's anyone who's been more quoted than Roger Federer. And I know that he said one of the reasons to start the Laver Cup, one of many, one to pay tribute to Rod Laver and players from the past. He said that, he told his agent, Tony Gotzik, that I make more money in one exhibition than he made in his whole career. But to have the Laver Cup to help the younger players, he also said that one of the reasons they've done so well, he's actually said that, is that people don't go forward. He also said, this is almost verbatim, it's frightening how low the level of play is at Wimbledon. I know that less than 2% of the time my opponents are coming in behind their serve.
Yeah, well, a great stat there is that, in the 2001 Wimbledon match between Federer and Sampras, the serve and volley was just used nonstop. I forget the exact number that Sampras served and volleyed against Federer, but you can imagine that it was a lot. And then in the match against Djokovic in 2019 at Wimbledon, Djokovic served and volleyed, I believe, 0 times. And maybe it was one. It was either 1 or 0. And it just shows you the difference in the way the game is played. And, another argument I hear about this is, oh, well, the players aren't good enough to come to the net. And I'm like, yeah, because they're not coming to the net. They're not going to just start in one match and suddenly be amazing at it. They've got to start somewhere, right? So yeah, I mean, there was a guy earlier this year at Wimbledon, actually, Jordan Thompson, Australian player, who came to the net a ton against Djokovic at Wimbledon, and he did lose in straight sets, but one of the sets was 7-6, the other set was 7-5, and they were very highly competitive sets, and he was really pushing Djokovic, and it was really entertaining to watch as well. And it was just like, I just don't get, if everyone's watching this, how are they not implementing the same strategy, or at least trying to do it, more often? Not saying you have to go to the net every single shot, every point, but do it more than you are now.
Nick, do any stats come to your mind with, being fortunate enough to have a win over one of the big three for 3 sets versus 5 sets? I think it's always.
Say that again.
Any stats? I would guess, just off the top of my head, it's much easier to have a win over one of the top 3 players, the big 3, in a 3-set match versus a 5-set match, a major.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to look how many losses they each have. Obviously, 5-setters are being played way less frequently, so they're naturally going to have less. But I think kind of what we're saying kind of speaks to the fact that this strategy of trying to rip ground strokes, you'll have more chance of winning a match in a 3-set match than a 5-set match. I think a good recent example of this was Tsitsipas at the French Open in 2019, or excuse me, 2021 in the final against Djokovic, where he won the first 2 sets and then lost in 5 sets. And it's just like, at a certain point, Djokovic from the baseline is going to break you down. And Djokovic has won, a few 5-setters he won against Thiem in 5 sets. In the Australian Open one year, he won that match against Tsitsipas in 5 sets. And just, in the long run, they're just going to break you down from the baseline. Particularly, I would say more so breaking you down is more so the case from Nadal and Djokovic. One interesting thing is that Federer, Federer against Nadal and Djokovic in matches that last under 2 hours it's a resounding record. He's got a much better record, but when the match goes over 2 hours, he's losing most of the match. I don't have the stat in front of me, but he's losing most of the matches against Nadal and Djokovic. So I think that's one interesting dynamic within, the trio itself.
Let's go with some technical points. Evolution of Nadal's forehand.
Yeah, I mean, Jim and I was starting a Big 3 podcast a few years ago. I only did a few episodes, But one was with Jim, and we talked about Nadal's forehand and talked about how in recent years on the turn, he started to open the racket face pretty significantly. And, questioning, against most players, it's probably not going to be, a difference maker. But when you play against the way Federer was playing in 2017, taking the ball so early, hitting it so deep, playing against Djokovic, whose backhand is just pretty much unbreakable most of the time and could create so much depth, especially in those cross-court rallies, it really makes you wonder if Nadal had kept the same forehand that he had when he first came on tour, would he have been more successful against those two guys later on in his career? I mean, he's lost, I believe, the last 11 matches he's played against both of them off clay, on faster surfaces. And that, in my opinion, this change in forehand technique has something to definitely do with it.
What's your opinion on the topic of Rafa? Your opinion on him standing so far back? We see other players, follow suit, Medvedev and Ruud. What's your opinion of him starting to stand, or he started, I guess you can say, a lot of people have before, but he's known for standing really far back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's on clay. You can't argue what he's done. Of course, I think on hard court and grass, that's where the bigger questions can be asked of whether that return positioning is the right choice. Again, I think really against most players, it's not really going to make the difference most of the time. But when you're playing when you're playing Djokovic and Federer, I think that's when you really have to start asking questions, because if you give them a short ball, you're going to be in trouble. And your ability to withstand the next shot is going to be much tougher. So yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's good to use it against certain opponents, but if I was coaching Nadal, not that would ever happen, but if I was coaching Nadal, I would say, like, look, if you're playing Federer or Djokovic, you got to try to hold the baseline as much as possible. And I think he's played his best in the past when he's aggressive. I've always said with Nadal, I think when he's aggressive, that's when he's his best. Even on clay, when he routed Djokovic in the 2020 French Open final, he was extremely aggressive. And if you're starting that far back in return, yeah, you're probably making it a lot harder to be aggressive.
I loved it when Nadal was asked, how do you beat Nadal? And he said, that's easy.
Djokovic, how do you beat Djokovic?
No, that's another comment. But Nadal was asked, how do you beat Nadal? And he said, that's easy. Don't miss and be super aggressive. But yeah, what Ivan brought up is Nadal was asked, he lost 7 times in a row to Djokovic, and said, what's the difference? He goes, it's simple. He goes, he used to play 3 meters beyond the baseline. Now he's playing 1 meter beyond the baseline. I love to listen to what the pros say. I think of the late Welby Van Horn. He was always asking people. He would just meet people and say, hey, how do you think you develop a tennis mind? I do think that's one thing with, say, Rublev, and I thought it was very nice when just the other day, the match you mentioned, Djokovic, and he had been ill and he came back, and Rublev, he was so close to winning. And that courtside interview, Djokovic just, excused himself and stepped over and consoled Rublev, who was in tears. And Rublev he's improved so much. I remember being in a challenger, and some of the guys were going, "Oh, that guy's going to burn out." I go, "I don't think so." He was like 17. He was at T-Bar M in Dallas, and he was pumping iron. And anytime a court opened up, he just went all through the player lounge asking somebody to practice. He was just tennis animal. He's improved so much. But don't you think those guys get so close, and then it's like, then maybe, yes, I could beat one of these guys. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the demoralizing part for so many of them, is to feel like they're so close, and to not win. And someone like Dimitrov, who Djokovic played in the final, had such a good week, and then he comes to the final and he just doesn't play his best tennis, and also having to face Djokovic. It's just like, wow, I just beat like 5 of the best players in the world. Now I have to play someone who's 20 times better than all of them, and do it again one day later. And I think that's what so many have run into that issue over the years. But going back real quick to the Djokovic improvement, to me, the big thing that Djokovic really changed from earlier in his career is how many
more backhands he hit. Because I think you watch a lot of these earlier matches and all he's doing is running around his backhand and just trying to club forehands and just crush the forehand over and over and over. And he used to just try to annihilate the forehand. And nowadays you never see that. Of course, you know, his backhand is his best shot. And I think that was a huge improvement that he made. And I think that probably helped him with his stamina as well, not trying to run around forehands. I think of Jack Stock, or Tommy Robredo, just these guys who just wanted to run around their backhand all day, and just like the level of like fitness that had to take to exert that much effort to constantly run around the forehand shot after shot after shot, and the quality of shot needed to do so. Whereas Djokovic can just sit there and just hit his backhand and do so many things with it. I think that was like a big improvement that he made. And obviously he also improved his forehand technique as well to, you know, do what you said, Steve, and get closer to the baseline, take the ball earlier as well.
And just by taking the ball earlier, I mean, he used to, on his forehand, his racket face would be, you know, facing the back fence, and it's amazing. He has changed that. What about evolution of Nadal's backhand? What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the main thing that I saw from him over his career is that he's just shortened the swing. You know, he used to have the take back that was very identical to his forehand, where it was just, you know, he starts in the ready position, takes the racket back, you know, on edge, you know, 180 degrees, close the racket face, and then, you know, he swings inside out, and that's it. Now he has more, you know, he goes down, he has a little bit of a reset on certain backhands. And, yeah, I don't know. I've always felt like his backhand was the shot that was, obviously it's not going to be as potent as the forehand, but it also was probably a little more reliable. You know, he's always great at hitting it sharp cross court when he steps in and is wanting to hit those angles. It's always been a great shot for him. But I think the change he made on his backhand was not really, I don't think it had too much impact on his career.
For our listeners, the term reset, that means the player takes the racket low and resets it. They bring it back up high, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, exactly.
How about Djokovic with his serve? I know at one time and he has, you know, he has opened himself up to work with many coaches. He was working with Todd Martin at one time, and at that time, perhaps it wasn't Todd Martin, but it didn't go so well. What are your thoughts on his serve? I mean, he used to really have a palm up.
Yeah, I mean, I did a post sometime last year, the year before. That was like one of my most well-received posts ever, most shares, views, whatever, about the evolution of his serve. And like you said, you know, it was palm up, and his toss was really high. Like it was really, really high. Just like so many things that were problematic. And yeah, nowadays I think, you know, you see that his serve is so simple. I see that he's gotten into, you know, what you've referred to, Steve, over the years into the Cobra position. And you know, I feel like that's something that's even different than it was from 2015, where his serve was already a lot better, but now he's adding things to it. I've noticed in the last couple of years, the toss is further into the court. I did a post yesterday showing how much further he's tossing the court now than he was in 2015. I went to the U.S. Open in 2021 and sat courtside, probably like 10th row, but I was on the side of the court, and like just seeing, it was noticeable how much further his toss was in the court than everyone else. That was like the most striking thing to me, how much more into the court he was tossing. And you watch these matches now, and he just wins so many free points off his serve, and it doesn't look like he's doing anything. He looks so relaxed. It's very much like what Federer did throughout his career. Maybe not to quite the same effect, but like it's getting close. And to think about where he was in 2009, 2010, it's pretty incredible to see the evolution of that shot. And now, you know, he's palm down over his head. There's really not his elbows further back. He's just doing everything so much better.
You know, you think the term hitting spots was always brought up with Roger, but Djokovic, it's amazing under pressure where he can just, and he's just so accurate as far as placing his serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's incredible. You know, and I think as he gets older, when he plays matches, it's going to, you know, help him he's 36 now, and if this guy's going to be like Tom Brady and play till he's 80, I think winning free points off the serve is going to be very helpful.
Well, I mean, from the service line in, he's improved so much. It just keeps getting better. As far as the GOAT, I don't really like that conversation, but he probably is the GOAT when it comes to nutrition and flexibility. I heard his wife say he's either stretching or thinking about stretching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the defense he's able to play even now, like he looks more athletic than everyone else. Maybe Alcaraz is right there and Jenner, but like other than that, his athleticism is insane.
Somewhere in our library, I have a film of him stretching when he's 17 years old. He's been on top of that for a long time. I know in the players' lounges, like at Indian Wells or the U.S. Open places, I've seen him. You think people would copy him? I mean, they say, of course, he's got somebody to, go run some errands for him or go bring his meals to him, and but just he's Gumby. He's just Spider-Man.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned like, why don't people copy him? And I think this brings up an interesting point. I think he's made so many changes to his game, technically, physically, tactically, and I feel like so many pros, you see them play for so many years and just nothing changes. Yet you see Djokovic, who's made so many changes. And I feel like a lot of people think that once you get to that level, oh, well, that's what got you there. Well, it's like, okay, that's what got you to number 25. But now there's a reason that you're not number one. And this dude is, because he's willing to make the changes and you're not. And to me, that's like a really striking thing to see players who we see like obvious fundamental flaws in their game. I think a good example of one player who fixed it was Cilic, where he had that extremely high ball toss. He was 6'6" and not getting enough power on his serve. He lowered the ball toss, boom, suddenly he starts hitting bigger serves, wins the U.S. Open. And I think there's a thought from what I can tell from a lot of pros and like people who watch pro tennis, that these pros either cannot change or that they shouldn't change, and that what they've got is what they've got.
I think with Cilic, that's a great point. At one time, Federer said in an interview, they were asking about Cilic, and he said before he changed his serve or after he changed his serve. I would have just guessed.
Yeah, right.
I one time was at Indian Wells, and I was meeting with two students, Austin Krajicek and Raven Clausen, about retirement or career, post-career time, and it was Ivan Ozerets and Cilic, and they were practicing like all day, the same thing over and over again. But he did change his serve. I think also too with Goran, I recently read where he says he gets a phone call, the day is done and it's 10 o'clock at night, and Djokovic calls him up and says, I wasn't hitting my backhand very good today. I need to hit more backhands. And Goran goes, I don't think he missed one backhand. He said that, and he openly thanks his team for putting up with him because he drives them crazy. But no, just amazing the work ethic.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the U.S. Open this year at the practice, and I sat on Arthur. In the practice qualifying rounds, you can go into Arthur Ashe, sit front row, and just sit there all day for free. So I went there and sat there for 5 or 6 hours. By far, Djokovic was, not saying that the others weren't serious or whatever, but Djokovic by far was the most serious. He was by far the player who was most, it felt like he was actually playing a match. And, if everything wasn't exactly precise about what was going on, he let his team know about it right away. And you could just tell how serious he was about what was happening in that practice. For one instance was like, he was ready to serve and no one had a ball. And he was like, okay, well, where's the ball? Like, there's so many people on the court. I need the ball now. And like, we all know this is what creates the champions, to have that type of mentality and type of work ethic.
I read an article where the author, he stalked the big three and just observed, and they didn't use their cell phones. And then he took on, he observed 3 younger players, and they'd be in the weight room, and They would do an exercise, do the reps, go to their phone, go do another exercise, go to their phone. I see that all the time with the juniors I work with. It's like a third arm. They just can't get rid of the phone. But
Yeah, 100%.
That expression, all business. But no, again, even volleying. One year at the Australian Open, he thanked Mr. Laver for being courtside, and he said, I know I'm supposed to come to the net more, and I'm working at it. So I think, you definitely with Federer, he has an Australian influence with Peter Carter, and then going back, it was Peter Carter first, and then Tony Roach, and the Aussies. You talk to an Aussie, they still thinking with what they accomplished in the 50s and 60s, that Australia is still the best tennis nation ever. And but I think that the appreciation of history, Djokovic is right in there as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I think statistically you can't really argue anything at this point about who's the best. I mean, it's just pretty objective at this point. You look at pretty much every metric, and he's ahead. And it's tough to really, as far as like who's the greatest of all time, if you're going to use statistics right now, I would say it has to be him at the moment. I don't really see what would be changing that anytime soon either.
I don't want to forget character either. With I love the line of Jimmy Connors. I think he said it looks like Nadal. He's got no money and he's playing for lunch money.
Who said that?
Connors said about Connors said about Nadal that he looks like he's broke and he's playing for lunch money.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But a nice story about Nadal. At one time he was supposed to hit with Wielander. I think it was 2008, and it rained during the time they were supposed to hit. And he stayed afterwards, and he called him up and said, "Hey, I'll hit with you Monday." He stayed the next Monday to hit with Wielander. So I think in this young kid Alcaraz, I do think that they all have appreciation for the past.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to realize with the big three, it's just like this. It's unlikely that you're going to see any era like this again with three players of this caliber.
How about the Fed? Talk to us about Fed in the forehand.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like throughout his career, it's been a shot where I think people obviously know how, aesthetically pleasing it's been. But then if you watch an entire match in certain matches, there's points where like, okay, this shot can break down a bit. And this shot, against Djokovic and Nadal specifically, has definitely cost him in certain moments. It's given him, it's like live by the sword, die by the sword with the forehand. And as far as technically speaking, I think as his career has progressed, he started to drop the racket, more inside his hand than he did earlier in his career, where when he would take the racket back and drop it, it would be kind of more closer to the back fence, and now it would be like more closer to the net, where now it's like, or when he was finishing his career, it was to the side of him. And I felt like, I always watching him, like, man, that's like a lot of free stretch and a lot of lag and under pressure with like a smaller racket and a smaller frame. You question if he had stuck with the forehand he had in like 2006, and then maybe use a slightly bigger head, would that have allowed him to be more consistent?
As a Fed fan, sorry to interrupt this, I completely agree. Yeah. I used to watch older matches. 2000, when he had that final streak where he was in like 12 finals in a row or whatever it was his forehand. I mean, so circular. It's very different forehand in the 2004, 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 era of his, when he had that long stretch of being number one. His forehand was different. It was very circular. He didn't have that ballistic type swing where it kind of lagged and snapped. It was very, and I feel like one of my favorite matches to rewatch is his when he beat Agassi in the U.S. Open, Agassi's last match.
Yeah,
I mean,
such a good match.
It's a great match, and his forehand, I mean, it's just, look at it, it's circular. I mean, it's very.
It was like Agassi.
Yeah.
One thing with Vic Braden, if I could just say one thing, and I think I'm right in the corner of people who say so many great things about Vic Braden, is I used to travel and do all these clinics with Vic, and early on, I would be inside doing the video, and Vic would be outside. He'd do one of those traveling clinics. In fact, Jim Klein told a story where he first worked with Vic. I was called up, and Vic needed somebody to help him at the Doylestown Tennis Club, and I sent Jim, and it was many, many years ago, and the same thing happened. Jim was inside doing the video, but as the years went by, Vic stayed inside and did the video, and I'd be outside running the courts. But he used the term pre-stretch, like say with Sampras did it, Agassi for sure. On the forehand side, it helps them keep the bracket on the same side of their body, and they lift their elbow, and they do add another segment. And it's I remember one of Jim's juniors. Think for a second. Jared Solomon.
Yeah, and, Jared. Yep.
With he's training with us with the idea to go on and play college tennis. So he's a good tennis player, and I just I think some of those things evolve. I think for the listeners, for the parents, if you've got a child who's 9 years old and you're asking about a pre-stretched forehand, I think that there's a danger, there's a red flag to trying to interpret what the very best players do. I use the analogy where if you went to a jazz concert and someone's playing the saxophone, you go up and you ask that person, how do you do that? How do you hit that one note? Not that I know anything about music, but they're not going to intellectualize, they're not going to articulate how they play the saxophone. They've just been playing it. You just think about the amount of myelin that adds up and the timing that the players have. The 10,000 hour rule, the late Anders Ericsson, the Swede who was a professor at Florida State, the building of myelin is, 3 hours a day for a year is 1,000 hours. And you just think of the myelin that, you could pick out any of the big three. It's just, how they use their hands when there's a serve that's hit wide at 130 miles an hour. I mean, how do they do what they do? But I think that's because of the evolution and what they did, all those steps through, just like any tennis player from playing the 10s to the 12s and on.
Well, what I actually think is
I'm sorry. What I was going to say, I just remember with this young kid Solomon at the time. It was, he's probably doubled in age by now, but it was like, we do not need to be talking about a pre-stretched forehand. I would say that it was probably true with 90% of the people I coach. Is no, let's stay with the fundamentals. Let's stay with basics. We don't need to. We need to be inspired by the big three, but we don't need to be copycats of the big three. If we're going to copy anything, it would be their work ethic. And, just like I said with Djokovic, let's start stretching some more,
there's only sorry.
I was going to say, or start looking at how they played when they were younger, from especially we're still on the topic of Federer. I fall into that camp. I'm to blame. I look at, YouTube videos. Okay, how does this lag and snap work? What's this about? And I want to copy the pros because that's what I'm watching on TV, and that's what kids are nowadays with their YouTube and stuff. You just look at highlights and they slow mo this one big shot they hit when they open up and lag and snap, and it's like, oh, I want to do that. And juniors should look to copy pros when they were their age. So if a junior's 8 years old, okay, what was Fed doing when he was 8? When he was 12, what is he doing when he was 12? And I guarantee you that Fed had circular swings and long follow-throughs when he was young.
Well, I sent a video just today. It was a film of Roger Federer hitting it as a 12-year-old, and I was asked, does he have a Western grip? And I think the 45-second clip, I think that the film, they showed the player from the back angle, and I think that was his opponent. I don't think it was him. And it was like, I think it's great for fans to have passion, and there's a danger to YouTube research. In other words, well, I'm going to look at this clip and it's one shot. You don't know the tactical situation. You don't even know if they made the shot, depending on what the angle was. Go ahead.
Yeah, the YouTube. Yeah, I was going to say, well, the one thing is with the pre-stretch, I feel like for me personally, it's something that I, discussed with Jim as I was trying to become a better coach and started teaching better players. because it's something that I would never teach, because I felt most of the players that I would teach just weren't ready for it, and came to a point where it's like, all right, you got to find someone who is like insanely talented and athletic, and who's ready to just start swinging a little bit faster when you maybe start introducing it in a very minor way, but certainly not in the realm of what Federer was doing later on in his career. And I think probably with the adults that I teach, I think most of the people I teach, they come like once or twice a week, so it's I don't have time to teach them an extremely difficult thing, like things that the pros are doing, and expect them to learn it quickly. So I think that also factors into that. And I would say the one thing that I see people copying the most from the big three in the technique is we had a clinic that we were running, one-handed backhand clinic. It was all one-handed backhand for an hour. And, we would drill for like 35 minutes and then do rallying for the rest of the class. And I would say maybe 80% of the people came in trying to hit their backhand like Federer, most specifically, but not copying the part of Federer's backhand that was the best, which in my opinion was the follow through, but copying the take back, where the racket is so open in the backswing, where you compare to Wawrinka, where it's much more neutral and then closed, where Federer like barely gets his racket closed. But it's Federer. He's Roger Federer. You're taking a lesson with me. So these are two very different things that are happening. And I see so many people with this, and I'm sure you guys have seen it, with this open racket face take back. A handful have told me, yeah, I watched Federer. I learned it from Federer. I watched Federer do this.
Yeah, that's where. So fortunate to spend time with Vic Braden. Vic Braden, the man. There's great. I think it's fantastic that people do such a great job with Vic Braden, the resource. But Vic used to say, "I'm a toad. You're a toad. We're all toads. Roger's not a toad."
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
With, Roger at times would, let the wrist go too early. But he certainly would make some unforced errors. But he got to the point where he could make a mistake, just look right at it. But the thing about being aggressive, and it's kind of like Michael Jordan, give me the ball and I'll shoot again. It's not like it wasn't like he got tentative. He would just keep taking some good cracks at the ball.
100%.
I got a question for you. Rafa has struggled with some injury here.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick, in your opinion, he's coming back for his last year is what they say, is what he said. How do you like his chances? Do you think he's going to do well, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's so tough to say. I mean, like, look, Murray had the big hip surgery, hip replacement. Nadal's is not exactly the same, but I don't know if the bigger issue is coming back from the injury or the fact that when he comes back, he's going to be dealing with Alcaraz, Djokovic, Sinner, Medvedev, who I think all at various points of this year, of course, Djokovic and Alcaraz more so, have played at very high levels. So to come back and then maybe just have like one more year on the tour, I'm not going to count Rafa out, but I do think there is a significant uphill battle. Now, at the same time, if you told me, all right, Rafa wins the French Open next year, I would be surprised, but I would be surprised, but I'm like, all right, it's Rafa. At the end of the day, like, he overcame injury and won another Grand Slam. I wouldn't be like totally stunned. I would just be like, okay, wow, that was insanely impressive what this guy did, where it seemed like his career might be over, and then he comes back and wins another Grand Slam, kind of what Federer did in 2017.
Yeah.
At one time, Sampras, said, gee, I'd really like to play Nadal. And he finally saw Nadal in person, and he said, wow, he's so much better than I thought he would be. A lot of times in junior tennis, if a kid has an extreme grip on the forehand side, people say, well, I'll just slice,
Mm-hmm.
keep the ball low. But you really don't want to do that, because you're hitting a minus and they can step up and hit a plus. What's best against someone who has an extreme grip is coming in and volleying to it, because especially the way Sampras could drive a volley, his trajectory, as you know, is what keeps the ball low. So if somebody drives a volley, but as Vic would say, people don't have the option. it'd be nice that you're playing somebody who's like, say, years ago, Michael Chang and Stefan Edberg in the French Open final. Wielander said so many great things about Federer, loves Federer, and it was taken out of context because Wielander said, he was chicken because he didn't go forward enough. But if they listened to the whole spiel that Wielander had on Federer, it was so positive. But Federer's own numbers, I go back and I think the first time they played, it was Federer came in at the French, Federer and Nadal. Federer came in 17% of the points and won 73, something like that. And it's like, well, okay, simple math says, go in more, lose less, but you're still going to end up winning the match. But, Federer himself said that, I like my forehand better than I like my volleys. I mean, I'd love to listen to what people say, what Federer says. I remember Leighton Hewitt said, I have no approach zone. I have no transition game. That's what he said about his own game. But Federer was asked about Edberg. He said, why don't you go to the net more? He goes, like Edberg did. And he said, if I could volley like Edberg, I would. It's just really interesting what the players say. Like Andy Roddick said one time, Roger Federer's an artist, a technician. I just hit the crap out of the ball.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Federer backhand volley is, an example of like, all right, what Federer can hit these backhand volleys with like a very steep downward swing and make it work. But you, as someone who's learning tennis, at court 16, or even me, Nick Nemeroff, who's, barely a 5.0 player, I can't do that regularly. I just don't have, the gifts that Federer has to be able to, pull that off repeatedly. So that's another example of what you were saying earlier, Steve, of, you've got to, watch the pros, but also be very careful of what you're trying to copy from them. And also going on YouTube and watching 10 different things and trying to source your information out from 10 different places is a very tricky thing. And something that I personally advise people that I teach, like, hey, if you're going to follow something, try to follow one thing. Try not to hear 3 different things from 3 different coaches.
I think with Nadal compared to Federer and Djokovic, Nadal, it's like he came from a soccer family. He came from the backboard. He came from hitting with Uncle Tony. He came from Mallorca. He came from the island, and the exposure. I think that soccer mentality. I think Djokovic said it best when asked about Alcaraz. He said that he thinks he has the best of all 3. That he has his own foundation. It's pretty much how he said it. Then he said he has the finesse of Federer, and then he has the warrior mentality of Nadal. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, he's extremely talented, clearly. He has probably more power than probably all 3 of them. Though, yeah, I mean, I think with Alcaraz, what I see as being Alcaraz's biggest obstacles, one is that I think sometimes, what I think he needs to develop is just playing with a bit more control at times. Sometimes I think he is too guns a-blazing, and sometimes he needs to play with a little bit more restraint, put a few more balls deep cross court instead of trying to run around a backhand and rip the next forehand. Sometimes I think he goes too big too often. Clearly his mechanics are very strong. And though the one thing that I am not as big of a fan of with him, even though it works, is his serve, where he stops at the top of the swing. Kind of like Cameron Norrie. And he just pauses there. And obviously he can still hit a huge serve, but it makes me question, all right, if he does this for, 5, 7 more years, what kind of impact is that going to have on his arm? Where he's not creating the power as easily as someone like Djokovic, who has a much more fluid, continuous motion, who's tossing the ball lower, who's tossing further into the court. And I think, of course, when we talk about these players and we're giving them, I guess, a little bit of criticism here, we're talking about obviously the best players in the world, but I still think even with them, they all realize, oh wait, there's still room to get better. But yeah, he has, he obviously has a great mentality. I just think there's some things as far as shot selection and shot choice that he needs to improve on. And I think when Djokovic is not here, he's obviously going to be the guy to beat.
Yeah. With there's another player, young player out there. Since we're on the topic of younger outside the big three, Holger Rune.
Yeah.
I saw him play in Paris, and he has, I believe, Becker in his corner now, and he it looked like he changed his forehand. He was swinging up above his head a lot, and I don't know. It looked like he was not playing as well off his forehand side. I don't know if you saw that. I
did not notice that.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong, but I was caught it. I'm like, because before it was very interesting watching him hit his forehand. He'd have a very quick unit turn. He'd just set up his racket. He'd wait, and just explode onto the ball, and the racket would be very.
So you're saying the difference is the follow through more so?
A little bit of both, but what was noticeable to me was the follow through, where he'd wrap it over his head, 75% of the time. Whereas before I don't think I ever saw him doing one. So just different technical changes. I'm interested if maybe that was Becker's influence. I don't know.
Well, I think what happens with players at the high level, the ball comes deeper, comes faster, and the frequency, the consistency. And I think players, over time, they make refinements in their game. I mean, if you were to look at Monfils, I mean, people at the top, over time, they'll simplify their game. And I think also, too, you come back to Milan. I was at a Challenger with Ivan a couple of days ago. And, some of the players, actually, one player that I had coached since he was 11 and another player that I've watched play since he was 11. And there's others, if you're around those circles. And one of the players, I mean, he's a huge guy, super aggressive, lefty, big serve. And his mechanics haven't changed. He's still inefficient, but he has more myelin. So the greater the amount of myelin, as far as motor programming, the speed and the smoothness of movement. So people are the pattern of the racket's very much the same, but they are smoother with their movements. So yeah, there are changes. But I think with Djokovic, of the big three, don't you think he's made the most changes?
Oh yeah, it's not even a question. I mean, Federer obviously made the change in 2017 to step in earlier on the backhand, which was clearly an incredibly important and effective change. And he played so well that year. The big shame of that year was that Djokovic was playing very poorly that year, and they didn't really get to play each other. And it would have been great to have seen them both at their best in that season. That would have been a great match with Federer, playing so early and so aggressively off the backhand. But yeah, Djokovic has definitely made the most changes by a wide margin.
I think for the parents listening, one thing in 2017, Roger Federer said, my father was always right. He kept telling me I was chicken, just hit my backhand. But the story I heard from a friend of a friend, Tony Gotzik, friend of mine who lives up in Cleveland, said that Tony told Roger, we've said this before on our podcast, I'm sure, is that he needed to use analytics. And Roger at first said, no, it's too expensive. And Tony said, I'll pay for it. And then he said, I'll pay for it, but I don't want all those numbers in my head. But in the end, he did use tennis analytics. For our listeners going even deeper away from the big three, is that analytics are great, but at the same time, I don't think that in junior tennis, the numbers for grip, swing, and body are used. I mean, it's like, okay, we're talking about stats and spin and this and that, but it's like, okay, let's go through what developmental players need. But the word changes come up. Nick, what about the grass? If they didn't change the grass at Wimbledon, don't you think Sir Roger would have been playing differently?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, especially against his two biggest rivals, if he could quickly involve the net and then avoid these long baseline rallies. Yeah, if the courts are, I mean, I think one match I think about that shows what I think would have happened if more courts were playing faster was Federer and Djokovic played a match in Shanghai in 2014, and Federer came to the net a ton, and he was serving and volleying a ton. and he won the match like 6-4, 6-3 against Djokovic, and it was one of the best matches that I've ever seen him play. Period. And definitely, probably, I have to think harder, but one of the best matches that he played against Djokovic. And I'm looking it up right now, actually, to see. Here we go. Let's see. It'll show here. This is on Tennis Abstract, how many times that he served and volleyed. So he served and volleyed 45 times. Or no, he went to the net. He served and volleyed 15 times, went to the net 45 times, won 25 of those points. So 56%. So he was, which is more points than he would usually win at the baseline, right? And a higher percentage at least. And that match he was constantly moving. And then on the faster course that they played on in the past, like Federer and Djokovic, Cincinnati and Dubai are the other ones that really come to mind. Going forward a ton and being aggressive a ton was paying much more dividends, much harder for Djokovic to get interest on his defensive shots and to really play the ball back deep, where Federer is struggling to play offensively on the next shot. So yeah, if they had not changed the grass, it would have been, different story for sure, I think, in a lot of these Wimbledon.
I've got some questions here. This is fun. Jim Klein. So you were 12 years old when you met Jim?
I was, 2005. I was 12. Yep.
And how old are you now?
I'm 30.
30, old guy. So
old, yeah.
Who knew?
I'm way older than Yvonne.
Who knew 18 years ago that we talk radio, this podcast forum, that we'd have questions from Jim Klein, senior moment. I know a lot of Jims.
Yeah.
I'm a little older than 30. You and Yvonne added up. I'm older than both of you guys combined, but from by a long ways, actually. Yeah. But Jim's one question here: what stats are the most important to you in trying to debate the GOAT?
Yeah, I was thinking about that before the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think they're fairly obvious, but of course, Grand Slams one is going to be at the top. Weak set number one, Djokovic is pretty far ahead at this point of Federer. Head to head, Djokovic is ahead of both. Wins, he has the most wins over the top 10. He has the most Masters 1000 events. He has won the World Tour Finals, the ATP Finals. He's won that 6 times. Likely will win it a 7th next week when that takes place. So I'd say those would be the main ones.
I've read where some people are saying, well, it's who's done the most for tennis, and then one of the former players, highly respected player, was saying this. They're talking about the Fed, and but boy, I tell you what, I've met a lot of Serbians, and it's just amazing what. In all of them, but what Djokovic has done for players from his country.
Yeah, I think if people are open-minded to it, obviously there's the 3 fan bases, and everyone's very supportive of the one that they like. And I think if you are open-minded and you allow yourself to actually view these 3 players from an objective point of view, there's so much to learn from all of them. I think with Nadal, you're going to learn about the fighting mentality and the never give up mentality, which I really think that can't be overstated. I think even when he's down in a set 5-1 40 love, he's playing the same point. And I really think from Djokovic and Federer, you've seen times where they get down in a set and they're going to tank the set, not give up, but just know hey, I'm going to reserve energy. Nadal, you never see that. From Djokovic, I think what people should take away from Djokovic, one, the athleticism and the flexibility, and 2, I think people should really look at the improvements he's made technically. I think it's easy, Djokovic is so clutch. He's so mentally great. Yes, that's true. But why is he so confident? Because he has the shots to back it up. Look, if my backhand was as reliable as him, I wouldn't be that nervous going into my next USTA match. But unfortunately for me, my backhand isn't as reliable, and I'm more nervous. And I think with Federer, I think you take away how, offensive he was and his willingness to move forward, and just at times how effortless he was. And I think if people can just really try to view, obviously these are the three greatest players of all time. Jim would also throw Sampras in there, which, I definitely can appreciate. But statistically, these three are by far the greatest of all time. On the men's side, and so I think there's something that you can really learn from all of them. I think it's cliche to say that, but I really think there is so much that you can learn from all. And if you choose to just try to find things that are wrong with them constantly, then I think that's where people get caught up in it, and it's not as productive.
No, that's a great point. But the hypotheticals: what if Sampras was at his prime, and he was in that mix with Federer and Federer and Nadal at first, and I think of Djokovic also too. He's third man in, and sometimes he was breaking up the bromance, and who's this guy? And he wasn't loved as much in the beginning, and perhaps some of the things where people thought he was faking injury and things that he's proven his character over and over again. And I mean, we all grow up, but I just think with so many different thoughts. But here's another question for you. Being a traditionalist, I mean, I like serving volley doubles. I'd like that to stick around. I think it's great to have one-handers. When I first got into tennis teaching, it was very unusual to see a two-hander. That's how long I've been teaching tennis. But the Fed recently told a group of juniors if he could do over again, he thinks he said, well, I think I'd be a two-hander. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking when you were talking about Sampras, I think, one thing that I think Federer a lot of the time against Nadal and Djokovic, I think Federer was at his best against those guys when he was returning without chipping or slicing. I think throughout his career against those two, he just left them too many short balls. And I think if he had played Sampras a ton of times, he would have quickly realized, all right, if this guy's serving and volleying against me nonstop and he's going to hit the ball to my backhand, if I just chip the ball to him, well, I am in big trouble. If I just leave too many balls sitting up there for him. So I think with Federer's return, I think that would have, been an improvement from if he had a two-handed backhand. And also, when you look at the defense of Djokovic and Nadal, they can defend more easily out of open stance with a two-handed backhand, where Federer with a one-handed backhand is, of course, much harder, and then you don't get as much interest on those defensive backhands, and you slice. And, I think it's better to hit topspin and get the ball deeper. So I think that could be true, but he also had such an effective variety on the one-hander. And early in his career, he did come to the net more. And, I think if he had a two-hander, there would have been some benefits, but it also would have taken away some of the things that he was so great at. I think it's a tough question.
No, that's a great answer. With the one-handed backhand is very versatile, and so many things. I think the conditions, if Rod Laver back in the day, players from his era, if you look at YouTube, and that's where YouTube is amazing. They didn't have a tarp at Wimbledon, and it rained, and it wasn't like 20 people came out and pulled the tarp out and covered the court. By the second week, they're wearing spikes. They're playing with wooden rackets. They didn't want the ball to bounce. And, that's the conditions that the players at that era played in. And, I do think that, a Rod Laver, just how well he played. And there were things that he did so well because of the conditions he played under. And I think all great champions would adapt and adjust. I think tennis history is very complex. I think right now, one thing that's of interest is that we just go with majors. Who's won the most majors, and the race who's won the most majors. World War II, for example, that was a big hiccup, a lot bigger than the pandemic. But then open tennis, just to think about Laver between 62 when he won the Grand Slam and 69 in between, he didn't play any majors.
Right.
So, that head to head, I think if they didn't change the grass at Wimbledon, Nadal, when he won, and was it 2008 when he first won Wimbledon?
Yep.
Yep.
Amazing match. One thing that helped him out is that he didn't think he was ready to win on grass. He obviously is going to show up like Medvedev. He's a great interview and says, my volleys are the worst. My volleys are awful, but I'm getting better. And I can't play on clay. I'm terrible on clay, but I did win the Italian Open. But he was very humble, and he said, well, I don't really like my chances going into Wimbledon, but like Medvedev, he's going to show up and do his very best on clay. Nadal shows up, and I think also being able to take the pressure off. It's like, okay, there was so much pressure on Federer to finally win on clay, but he was so great on clay. It was just that, he's Superman, but Nadal was kryptonite. Why don't you comment a little bit on it, the guys as far as playing on different surfaces? I mean, would you give Federer the edge on grass over both of them? Would you give obviously Nadal the edge on clay over anybody from any planet in the universe, or then hard court Novak?
Right. I think on clay, it's not even a question. On grass, you're going to give Federer the edge over Nadal. You're going to give. It's tough to say you're going to give Federer the edge over Djokovic because Djokovic beat him in 3 Wimbledon finals. Though, if Wimbledon had played like it was in early 2000, I suspect maybe 1 or 2 of those goes Federer's way. Obviously, in one of the matches he did have match point. One of the matches it was 4-4 in the 5th set, and he was close to breaking. So these were not like blowouts. And then hard courts, yeah. The edge has to go to Novak by far. Not by far, but the edge definitely goes to Novak. I think Federer has combined 11 Australian Opens, U.S. Open, and Novak is at 14 now. It's interesting that Novak had, struggled so many times in the U.S. Open final. Like he would get to the final and then lose. I just think overall, just because of his technical, how solid he is technically, I think if you're asking me to have them, they're going to play on a random surface, 2 of them on any random surface. I'm just going to pick Djokovic just because I think he's more technically solid. Now, if that match ends up being Nadal on clay, then I'm in trouble. But randomized, I would probably give the edge for Djokovic if I have to pick one of them randomly in a match, and I don't know what it's going to be on. I just had to guess.
With Nick, I got a question for you. With Djokovic and Nadal, Djokovic is the only player to beat Nadal twice, I believe, at the French Open. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, in your opinion, what do you think was that difference maker? Why is he the only one that could?
Well, the first one who did it was Soderling, who just hit the ball as hard as humanly possible for 3 hours and everything went in. And then the first time Djokovic and Nadal played, Nadal was having his worst year. Djokovic was having his best year. And then they ended up playing. And then when they played more recently, which was 2021, I just think that what makes Nadal so good on clay is just not as effective. It is still effective, don't get me wrong. It's just not as effective against Djokovic. It is still clearly very effective given their head-to-head on clay and at the French Open. I think Nadal is I think an interesting stat is that on hard court, Djokovic is, I think the record is, it's about 20-7 in favor of Djokovic. And then on clay, it's 20-8 or 20-7 in favor of Nadal. It's like the same thing, just obviously the other person is ahead. I lost what was the question again? Oh, why Djokovic beat him at the French Open?
Yeah,
I think Djokovic's number one contributor is going to be his backhand. I think what is Nadal's most deadly weapon on clay besides his movement and speed? It's going to be the high forehand. And I think against Djokovic, that's just less effective.
Yeah, but they've played before, and they've played before on clay and on that court, and it's just circumstance, or I don't know. When I watched that match, I just saw something, some in Djokovic's eyes. Kind of like when he was that match points against Federer at Wimbledon. Just his eyes kind of gave it all away. He said, "I'm not going away. I'm winning this match."
Yeah, I mean, if you remember that match, the third set was 7-6. It was a very long set, and after that, Nadal was just cooked. He just had worn him down, and Nadal was clearly dealing with some type of injury at that point. But yeah, Djokovic just wore him down, and usually Nadal's able to break his opponents down or get a short ball, then put the point away. That just wasn't the case against Djokovic that day. And look, if they play on clay, 10 times, Nadal's winning like 8 or 7. And, that was just one of the days that it was Djokovic's day.
Nick, what about doubles? Federer's with Wawrinka, he won gold at the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
Nadal, you have to tell me who he won. I forgot who he won doubles with. But he won gold at the Olympics as well, correct?
He won gold, but I think only in singles.
Okay, I thought he won gold in doubles, but
yeah, I think just singles.
I have to double check that.
But, I'm looking now. Yeah, you're right. He did. They won in. I honestly forgot about that. That was in 2016. He won with Mark Lopez.
Yeah, I remember afterwards that it wasn't that much of a shock for Wawrinka and Federer to win doubles. But even Nadal, he was kind of smiley, like this is a fluke. I'm not that good a doubles player. What are your comments on that? The big three playing doubles, and Djokovic. I really think Djokovic has. I mean, the game, the way he's serving, volleying now, not serving and volleying together, but just the way he can do both skill sets, and then obviously his return. But why don't you comment on the big three as doubles players?
Well, I think what you just said was with Djokovic's return, if he can, that's one thing that makes him very strong as a doubles player to begin with, is having a great return, especially if you're playing these teams that are, going to, not be able to deliver as much off the serve, maybe as some of the singles guys that he faces. And with Federer, obviously the volleys have always been tremendous. And Nadal, I think what Nadal's biggest attribute is like how precise his serve can be with the lefty serve. I mean, I feel like Nadal's serve is a bit underrated because it's maybe not as hard, or as he's not hitting the spots like Federer, but at least with the lefty spin, he's not always, but a lot of times setting something up positive for him. And I think in doubles they all have attributes that would be transferable to the doubles court.
I remember Nadal one year, U.S. Open, the year he won it. I'm not going to say the year, maybe 2016. I might remember. Whenever he won 10, I guess. Yes. I just remember him serving. I rewatched the match, and he was serving like 10 miles an hour above his average.
Yeah, that was 2010.
Yeah, and I mean, he won it, and he won it handedly, and I think it's the only time he did win the U.S. Open. And
he won 2010, and no, he's won like 4, I think.
He's won 4 U.S. Opens? Oh, my bad. Which one? Yeah. Oh, it was the Aussie Open. He only won once, and then he beat it recently against Medvedev in that close 5-7.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
The book on the big three. Obviously, there's so many things: mind vitamins, quotes, just things about their character. As far as other sports, I mean, Federer grows up in Switzerland, and I've always heard this about kids from Central and Northern Europe. They can all ski, skate, and play soccer. And I've been to Zurich. That's not exactly where he grew up, but it's where he lives now. And it's like everybody's going skiing on the weekend. And when you're a kid on a pair of skis, like on a pair of skates, you can fall at any moment. Where a kid's in a little kid tennis class, early childhood development, perhaps, and it's not the best clinic. They're waiting in line, and a few balls are tossed to them. Especially now, I think a lot of little kid classes in the United States are, it's too much of a carnival atmosphere, and there's no technical instruction at all. But what about other sports? I mean, Nadal, he's he obviously grew up on the beach and trying this and trying that, whether it was surfing or skiing. What about those guys as far as being athletes?
Yeah, of course, all three of them are tremendous athletes. I think I think when you look at Djokovic, you think of the flexibility. You look at Nadal, you think of, all right, this guy's ripped. He's an amazing mover. I think when you think of Federer, you think of just being more of a smooth mover. I think I always thought Federer's movement on clay was underrated, how well and effectively he slid on clay, and just how strong of a clay court player he was. I also think with Federer, I see more of if you think of Nadal, you think of the feet, the legs. I think of a Federer's athleticism more in the hands. Like you look at some of the flick shots that he would hit, and the touch shots he would hit, and the drop shots he would hit, and just the ease with which he was able to manipulate the racket and make it look so simple. And then everyone and their, like now with Alcaraz drop shotting so much, you see everyone and their mother at the courts trying drop shots out of nowhere. Everyone thinks that they're Alcaraz, and then their drop shot lands in the service box on their side of the net instead of the other service box. I mean, all three have their own athletic gifts that I think have made them so special. I think Djokovic, to me, the defining Djokovic trait is his flexibility and being able to defend so well with the open stance. For Nadal, it's the speed and the core coverage and the movement. And then for Federer, it's just what he's able to do with his hands. And just, the year that he was doing that saber where he would run into like the service line and half volley the ball, like not many people could do that. And he made some of those look really easy.
Yeah. With soccer, football, around the world known as football, here in the U.S. soccer.
Yeah.
Nadal's uncle, not Uncle Tony, but one of his uncles was on the Spanish team that won the World Cup. So he was born into jockocracy. Federer, in Switzerland with skiing being, obviously so prevalent, but in Serbia, Djokovic's parents, they had a restaurant where they made pancakes in the morning and pizza in the evening at the bottom of a ski hill. But just imagine if all three of them were soccer players. I heard someone talk about that one time. They would all be world-class soccer players, but their games would be very similar as far as the way they would play. And the person that elaborated on this was a soccer player. And I just said this is how they would play, but they would all have their own style. And just with I just think that's of interest. I think with your book, what else did they do when they were younger, but then also to the character side. You just hear so much about all three of them, and like Nadal, there's so many great thoughts. What's your goal? My goal is my next practice is going to be my best practice ever.
Yeah.
Right. Those are like Daniel Coyle has this book, The Talent Code, but the Little Book of Talent, here are 52 tips. But I think there's so many character tips, so many tips for forget what they do on the tennis court, but just the way they've lived their lives, and to get how they get to how they got to where they are. I think there's so much to that story. I like the backstory. People come to see me for technique, but it's really, I tell people that you can't really develop a player to a high level unless character's in the right place.
Yeah, totally agree. Clearly, all three of them, it's always been in the right place. I mean, I watch these videos of Federer training, and his training for his legs, and maybe this was also like to help with split step. Is like he would jump. Like sometimes I'll have the people that I teach to start, because I feel like when I teach split step, the people, they don't actually jump or get off the ground. And so sometimes I'll have them like hop over like a tube just to get them to kind of start jumping a little bit. And with Federer, I see this video of him like just using like hurdles that they would use in the Olympics. Like he would jump over 2 hurdles, hit a forehand, and then backpedal, and then do the same thing over and over and over and over. His longtime trainer, Paganini, would talk about just like how relentless he was training, and just how consistent and committed he was to maintaining and protecting his body, which I think when you compare him to Djokovic and Nadal, he always played with like, there's obviously like a little bit less effort, you can say. I think that was always something that how people would describe it. But he never retired from a match during the middle of a match, which is incredible. The guy played, so many matches in his career, and not to retire once mid-match is a testament to the work ethic and the character. And given that Nadal and Djokovic had retired from matches, Djokovic more so earlier in his career, just shows you how hard it is. It's not to criticize them, but just to show you what Federer did by not retiring from a match, how incredible of a stat that was.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's amazing. Not one time.
Unbelievable.
Junior tennis players need to realize that college coaches, now they can just at their fingertips push a few buttons and they can see how many times a player is withdrawn from tournaments. And sometimes it's legit, but sometimes it's they're worried about their UTR.
Well, this is one thing I understand about college tennis is, these kids, and Jim had been training a player who's now number one on a D1 team, and I've chatted with him about his experiences on the team and watched some of his matches that have been online. And they don't finish the matches. If the match is over for the team, the players traveled from Florida to Texas, and they're 5-5 in the third set, and they make them stop. And I just don't get it. I think it's insane. Like, even though the match is won, why are we stopping the match? And to not have ad scoring, I don't understand either.
Well, a couple of comments on one on no ad scoring. A guy like Chuck Creasy, who, he's a big proponent of not shortening the score. But years ago, the college coaches could play. They played no ad for I think 15 years, but they could play as many matches as possible. I know at tournaments, like say they have their conference finals or they have the national tournament at the end, and they need to stop the match to get the next match going. So I could see that when the team match is over. But I agree 100%. My son Connor was playing a match one time, and he won the first set, got down 4-1 in the second set. He just started throwing points, and the coaches came over and said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm going to lose this set. There's no way I want to play this guy in a 10-point tiebreaker." So he's intentionally missing. So before one of his teammates clinched, he had lost that second set. So then you're guaranteed. And again, I have to always verify, but the rule, it's up to the coaches. If the coaches agree, okay, let's play. And I think most of the time what they do is they'll play that 10-point tiebreaker. But I agree with you that play the match, play the match out, especially when they travel great distances like that. How about coaches? I think with Federer, I mean, I'm always quoting his mother, Lynette Federer, said when he was 8 years old, his lessons, he stood in one place on balance with long follow through. So he was taught static balance. But I also read where Adolf Kavotsky, Seppi, he was called, still alive, and you think he'd be a very sought after tennis coach. What did you do with Roger when he was 8 years old? But he said, well, Roger's the type of player that you could just show him once, and he could go out and just okay, this is an emergency shot. This is how you hit it, and he could just hit it. But why don't you talk a little bit about the coaches of the big three? Roger said he thought at the end of his career, he said, I think I had the right coaches at the right time. I mean, Djokovic, we go back to Nadal. I mean, Moya's in the mix now, but for the longest time it was just Uncle Tony. And I think for listeners, the Nadal family said, no, we're fine. We'll just keep working here in Mallorca. They didn't go to the mainland and work with the federation. And I do think it's the family that takes the tennis player down the road. Where Federer, he went off to the Swiss academy. Djokovic's parents did as much as they could, and then he was with Nicky Pilic in Germany. But what would your research or what would your thoughts be on the coaches of the big three?
Yeah, I mean, for Federer, he obviously talked about how much of an influence that his coach Peter Carter had on him. Obviously, he passed away when Federer was younger, and just kind of like emerging into the player that he was. I think that's always one thing that is tough to get a gauge on. How much of an influence does one specific coach have? For instance, like, okay, with Cilic, with his serve, that was kind of like a very clear thing. With Djokovic, with his game, it's like, okay, Marian Vida has been Djokovic's coach for so many years, but when we see Djokovic start making these technical changes, was it Vida? Was it someone else? Was it another member of his team? Were they getting outside consultation? So it's tough. It's tough to for me to really discern what changes have been made by who, unless the player is very explicitly declaring, okay, hey, this coach allowed me to make this change. Yeah, Federer had Peter Lundgren, he had Edberg, obviously Severin Luthi was on his team for so many years, Tony Roach, ending his career with Ljubicic. I think it's very interesting that he had a player who played against him be his coach. I think that was really fascinating. I think that's the only Moya, I guess, as well, would be the only other one where, like, in the big three, that's like someone who they actually played is now their coach. I know Mark Lopez, who Nadal played doubles with, has helped him and been on his team a little bit. But yeah, I find that kind of fascinating as well. But like when I watched the practice of the U.S. Open with Djokovic, he would talk to his team, but I didn't understand what they were saying because it was in Serbian. So it was tough. So for me, to answer your question, it's always been kind of tough to gauge who's doing what exactly, unless the player is explicitly saying it, which typically they're not.
With Djokovic, a little tangent. I just thought we talked about the Olympics. He hasn't done so hot in the Olympics. They're coming up next year. Same thing. Do you think he's gonna break down like he's done the last two, where he gets so emotional? I mean, the last two Olympics he didn't do his best, and he just breaks down because he fights so hard for his country, and you can just see in his eyes, and he just doesn't perform at the Olympics. What do you think his chances are next year?
Well, it's in Paris at the French Open, so it will be a very interesting tournament, especially if Nadal is there. And I think he will be highly motivated to win. I mean, he's won every Grand Slam. He's won every Grand Slam 3 times now. And if he wins the French Open next year, it'll be every Grand Slam 4 times. He's won all 9 Masters tournaments. I believe now he's won all of them. I have to double check, but I think he's won all of them 3 times at least. And then, but the only thing he hasn't won is the Olympics. This would be the only Davis Cup. This would be the only thing that is left for him to achieve. So I'm sure he will be highly motivated, as will Nadal, to win the Olympics on clay at the French Open.
I do think the Serbian people want to do so well for the Serbian flag, and I do think obviously there's pressure, but I think that there's extra pressure when you just get on YouTube and look at the recordings of when Djokovic goes home, takes a trophy home. It's emotional. So many things come to mind. I think with coming back to World Cup soccer, when the World Cup was in South Africa and Spain won, the last minute, my understanding is Nadal, the family, they chartered a plane and flew down, and he said he wasn't going to go, but he was there and he was in the locker room, and he had just won Wimbledon. And the reporter says, "Is this just like winning Wimbledon?" He said, "No, soccer is much bigger." He said, "I don't want to not be respectful." I mean, and that's one thing about Nadal is off the charts when it comes to respect. So many random thoughts
100%.
coming to mind with coaching. Darren Cahill one time, he either went to Dubai or wherever, Switzerland, and he met with Federer to be his coach, and Federer elected not to hire him, but he did hire at that time Anna Cohn. I think with Ljubicic, one thing that I think the ratio has changed completely, where it was much less tennis. Like Ljubicic himself, towards the end of his career, big guy, and had the concern of not letting his body break down, but it was like 1 hour of tennis and 3 hours in the gym or something like that. I know that Ljubicic made him change his regimen as far as what he was doing as far as off court work.
Is it true, Nick? Do you know?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt your thought there.
No,
Maybe you know this is true, but I heard Federer, like clockwork, 2 hours before any ATP match he plays, he has pasta. Is that true? Have you heard something like that?
That I believe I have read that. Yeah, that does sound that when he's been asked, what his choice of meal is before a match, I have read that.
That's just so interesting because you look into all these different aspects of players, and Djokovic up there with nutrition. You don't hear much about it with Nadal, but with Djokovic, you hear about his transformation where he was struggling early on in his career with nutrition, where he'd get into these long 5-set matches and would just be drained. And he talked about in interviews where growing up in a Serbian culture, there a lot of gluten, basically a lot of breads, and he tried to find specialists and eventually found somebody that said, okay, this is the diet for you, no gluten. And, he did so much better after that. Any comments on the nutrition of the big three?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the most obvious one is Djokovic with the gluten. I think he's really been very vocal about how much of a change that made. I mean, he was retiring from a lot of matches, a lot of important matches mid-match. I mean, there was the one against Roddick at the U.S. Open where it was Roddick was not pleased with how that match ended, and pretty much said that Djokovic always has something that's wrong with him, and clearly the gluten was not helping him, and he, as you said, really attributed to his ability to start playing and winning those longer matches. I mean, look, whatever all three of them have done has allowed them to, play tons of long matches, including in Masters events where they have to play long matches in back-to-back days and win those matches over many years. I think it's been easier for Federer because he plays a more aggressive style of tennis. I think for Nadal and Djokovic, I think Federer's style of play, which is probably less effort, putting less effort into the shots, allows him to play longer would allow him in theory to play longer matches, but just, based off the aggression that he played with, didn't end up being the case that he would play long matches. The only match that Federer had that was over 5 hours was the one he played against Nadal in Rome in 2006, which was in the fifth set. He lost 7-6. He had 2 match points. That was the only match he played. In my opinion, that's the best big three match that has ever been played. For anyone watching, you should go watch that match.
Could you say that again? What match is that?
It's 2006 Rome final between Federer and Nadal.
That's back when,
in my opinion,
that's been back when Masters had 5 sets, correct?
Correct. Yeah. That's the highest quality match that I've seen from both ends. I think it was a great combination of Federer's offense against Nadal's defense, but then they also had just like great classic clay court rallies. And it was just such an insane match, both in so far as the quality of tennis and how dramatic it was, especially the end of the fifth set where Federer really, really should have won and just missed 2 forehands that were right there for him. And
Now, the one thing with seeds, I'm telling juniors all the time, the first seed and second seed, certainly it's a great opportunity if you get to play the first or second seed, play the better players in the tournament. But the term seed is, if you put seed 1 or seed 2, they're both at the top or the bottom of the draw, depending how it's pulled out of the hat. But so the tournament can blossom at the end. And success breeds success. One thing along that line, success breeds success, is, these guys are walking corporations. They've made so much money and they have such great teams, and they're competing against people who don't necessarily, say in the early round, somebody comes up against one of the big guys. It isn't man on man. It's team against team, and they're the resources they have. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge issue for players who are trying to. I think it's a bigger issue for players just trying to make it in the tennis scene, not like oh, if you had a team, you would beat Djokovic. Of course, that's not true. But for them to actually make a name for themselves and to actually establish themselves as a really good pro, they need a team. And with the way that tennis winnings are handled as far as prize money allocation at these smaller events, it's just not possible for so many of these players to do anything besides just go to tournament by themselves. Well, when I was watching Djokovic at the U.S. Open practice, he's got his whole team there. There was probably, 4 or 5 people with him on the court. And that's just such an advantage. Of course, he's earned that advantage, but it's not like other sports where, I'm a big NFL fan, American football, and every team, doesn't matter if you're the best team or the worst team, you still have the same set of coaches, and you still have the same set of trainers. The players don't pay for anything as far as like the travel or the food. Everything is set up for them. In tennis, it's a lot lonelier and it's a lot tougher to make it. And I think once you get to that level, I think one thing that I've heard a lot of pros talk about is, the importance of them to be able to travel with their own physio and to be able to have someone there to be able to treat them and to help them stretch and help them prepare for matches.
Yeah, your book, I've been told that Nadal's never broken a racket. I've been told that the grandfather, there's just so much respect, not only with his father and his uncles, but, to his grandfather. So many Nadal stories. With heavy duty stuff, Peter Carter, he was killed in a car accident in South Africa, and Roger's mother being from South Africa, Roger, very young he was like very emphatic about Peter going to see the beauty of South Africa. And I think that was something that's written about. And, certainly there was a scene not too long ago where Roger was asked, he broke down, and, it's kind of like Andy Murray in that classroom, and he was in the school and the teacher came in, and just everybody knows what happened. Don't even want to mention it, but, but then what about Djokovic and the hardship? I mean, with war, some of the background stuff. What comes to your mind with the guys? We've talked about the
clearly Djokovic has talked about what he's gone through as a young kid living in Serbia, and obviously being in the middle of just bombings, and how he's been able to become from that position to become the number 1 tennis player in the world, and what he learned from those experiences and growing up in such a difficult environment, and that how that essentially allowed him to mentally grow as a person and a player. And I'm sure that has had so much impact on his life, and I'm sure that's continued to motivate him as far as how dedicated he is to winning for Serbia and for the Olympics next year. And I'm sure that's one of the main reasons why he gets so emotional playing for Serbia and playing for his country, because of what happened to him when he was a kid. And it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, you read reports that when he was a kid, no protein. I mean, just of the 3, the hardship through war. It's terrible what's going on in the world right now with Djokovic. You talk about Nadal and lunch money. The Djokovic family at one time, everybody in the country, they didn't know where the next meal was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some of those things are, and I'm with kids today, they used to say things about me when I was a kid. The kids today, the TV was called the idiot box, but with a TV now, the kids have a cell phone in their pocket and it's just constant. I'm always amazed that young tennis players don't watch the top players, but they don't read about the top players. It's not that expensive to get a library card and go read about these players. What about some of the books that have been written on the big 3?
The one that I have right now is the one by Christopher Clary, which I've only started reading. Truthfully, most of the book that I'm writing about is actually more based on the on-court portion of their rivalries. So what I've been reading most about the big three is actually old press conferences and old news articles as opposed to books. So a lot of press conferences from previous matches. Like I was just reading one from the first match that Djokovic and Federer played, and Federer was essentially like, yeah, this kid could be pretty good. He might have some talent, but he needs to work on a few things. And Djokovic was like, yeah, it was like I was scared to play the number one player in the world. But once I realized, okay, I could play with this guy, I was able to loosen up, and they went to a 3-set match. But yeah, most of the reading that I've done recently in the last couple of years has been a lot more articles and press conferences as opposed to books on these guys.
I think it's Chris Bauer wrote about a biography on Djokovic, is page 17, where his childhood coach talks about, in particular, Vic Braden books. It's just interesting where what outside influences they had from a tennis teaching standpoint. I think that's where, in my travels, was fortunate enough to go to Prague many years ago, and if I had to say, well, the country that I think tennis is taught the best in, from my observations, would be, now it's the Czech Republic, but it used to be Czechoslovakia and Slovakia. There's so many things that go behind a player to have them be successful. But I don't think people really, obviously people like yourself have done that, but really dig deep and go, what's really behind these guys. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. Just think about, and I guess that leads to a question with Alcaraz or others. Do you see anybody else winning multiple slams like the big three have?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sinner. I really am high on Sinner. I think he is as good as it gets. That's not Alcaraz, but I think he has the potential to get close. I mean, he's drastically improved his serve. His ground strokes are so potent. He's a really good mover. He's not as good of a mover as Alcaraz, but he's pretty good. He's starting to move forward a bit more, which Alcaraz does, and Alcaraz has great touch. Sinner needs to develop that as well. But he's got so much power, and he can take the ball so early. And he's also very mentally strong. He's very serious for a young player. And so, yeah, I would say those two guys. I think Rune is also one that you got to watch out for. I think his game is so solid. I think his technique is really solid. I think those, in my opinion, you ask me 5 years from now who's the top three based on what's happening now, I would say, assuming Djokovic is retired, I would say those three: Alcaraz, Sinner, and Rune.
I don't think it would be fair to not bring up Andy Murray. At one time, it was the big four. What are your thoughts on Murray?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he was able to get to number one in the world in 2016 and hold that spot for, I think it was somewhere around 40 weeks, while the big three were there, is incredible. I think, when it's all said and done, he'll be underrated in this grand scheme of things. I mean, he's beaten Djokovic 11 times. Even though he's lost 25, he's beaten him 11. I believe he's also beaten Federer 11 times. Murray, I'm looking it up right now. Murray and Federer. Yeah, he's beaten Federer. He's 14-11 against Federer. And then against Nadal, let's see here. Against Nadal, he's got 7 wins over Nadal. So, combined, he's almost got 30 wins against 3 of them. I mean, how many people can say that? And that guy just has so much heart, so much resilience. Such a good mover, such a great backhand, such a good return. Just those 3 things that he was so good at, movement, backhand, return. There was just that one other guy who was a little bit better than him at all those things. Of course, being Djokovic. And, the guy just fell into the wrong era, as did all the other players of the era: Buric, Ferrer, Tsonga, Del Potro, Wawrinka. All these guys who were living during the big three and would have had so many more titles if it wasn't for those 3 guys.
Yeah, there was Murray, always the injuries as well. What about European tennis? What are your thoughts? We asked guests on our podcast, American tennis. I think we all tire of American tennis getting beat up. You just mentioned, and I think that's a very interesting point. On the men's side, 5 years from now, who would be the big three?
Yeah.
What thoughts do you have to improve American tennis, or on the flip side, why do you think European tennis has an edge?
I mean, one thing is hit more backhand. I think Americans, you've had for years, you had Sock and you had Isner and Query and who else am I? I'm probably forgetting others. Isner, Query, Sock. I guess you could maybe throw Roddick in there as well. Just big serve, big forehand. And it's just, I think with some of the newer guys, the Americans like Tommy Paul I like a lot because I think he is just very solid from the baseline and he's not trying to just bash the ball past you. I also like Fritz a lot too. Obviously he's a bigger hitter, but he's also got a much more solid backhand. I think that's one thing with the more up and coming Americans that their backhands are way more solid. Tiafoe as well. Someone like Shelton kind of probably falls more into the mold of big serve, big forehand, but he's also more willing to come into the net, which I think is another factor. You have to move forward. You got to come forward. Korda is really solid as well. Great forehand, great backhand, really solid technique overall. So I think where American tennis is right now is for the men is pretty promising. And obviously for the women, you have Goff and Pegula. But for the men, I think it's definitely as promising as it's been in quite a long time. I don't see any of these guys, however, being able to get into that top echelon. I just don't think they have enough firepower, enough athleticism, enough touch, enough variety to compete with the Sinner and the Alcarazes of the world.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I think the red clay courts, that's a great teacher. And in a lot of parts of Europe, they have the best of both. Not necessarily in Spain. There was more hard courts. It was at 92 Olympics. There were more hard courts in Spain, but you can, as Jimmy Connors would say, you can take a short ball and slap it on a hard court, but you got to really work it more on a clay court. And I think back in the day when we did so well, it was before the Iron Curtain came down, the Berlin Wall, and tennis became global. But also when the Americans were, on our basic surface is a hard court. That's when going way back, 3 of the 4 majors were on grass, and it was not the grass of today. But yeah, this is very interesting. And then, then people might say, well, the World Group just beat the Team Europe. But
that was
But there's a few players missing from Team Europe.
A few, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just a few.
Rublev showed up, but I think 7 guys that were higher ranked than anybody else on the team did not show up.
Yeah, top 8 guys in the world, I don't think showed up.
With
Federer retiring and leaving Laver Cup, I think kind of put Laver Cup at a lower tier type of tournament. It's not really, you're not playing for your country like the Davis Cup. It's more of just a team event, and Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, when they were playing, it made it more high stakes because you had the best players playing. Federer retired now, Nadal's out, Djokovic just won the U.S. Open, and maybe, I don't know. The future of Laver Cup's very dim right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's been good theater. I think about good theater. I remember being in New York City. I watched Federer play Sampras, but it was after Sampras had retired for some time. He was off the circuit for a few years. But no, I like the thought. A champion. Every champion has their day. But the big 3, it's just amazing to think. You turn the clock back 10 years ago. Who would have thought? What is the breakdown now? It's 20 for Federer, right?
Yeah,
and it's 20,
22, 24.
Yeah, so What's your guess on that? I would think, so obviously if it's Las Vegas, Federer is stuck at 20. I mean, Nadal is going to play one more year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully it would be a great movie script if he could win the French one more time. They should change the name of the French Open. Just call it the
Nadal Open.
The Nadal Open. But a question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, I was going to say, it's interesting hypothetical of what if there were 2 clay court, Grand Slams every year instead of 2 hard court, or what if there was 2 grass? How different would these numbers? I mean, if there were 2 clay, we all know Nadal would have like
30.
So many at this point. Yeah, he would have so many at this point. Regardless of when these tournaments were played every year, he would likely be winning all of them, or close to all of them.
For 3 years, the U.S. Open was played on a hard true American green clay, and Borg did not win.
Interesting.
He did not win. But at one time, his neck was injured, and another time I'd have to think it was 74 was the last year was at Flushing Meadows. It was 75, 76, 77, or fact checker. It was Connors won all the even years, so he won 76. Rontes in 75 and Vilas in 77. I mean, it was 10 years in a row by lefties. But that was Borg's chance for sure but he retired at 26. I was at the Spanish school a couple of times. Emilio Sanchez, he was asked, and he loves Nadal. Who wins, Borg or Nadal? And he said Borg. I couldn't believe it. He just said because of how he could move. I remember being in a room with all these coaches, and Jose Garris, he had coached Federer for a little bit, and you could not hear a pin drop when he was talking about his experience coaching Federer. Trying to think. Milt Schmidt about Bobby Orr. He goes, "I'm just happy I lived when Bobby Orr lived," and I think that we've all been so fortunate to live at the time of watching these 3 play tennis.
For sure. I mean, I think Djokovic will get. I mean, he's at 24. He's won. Amazingly, he's won since 2015. Like since the beginning of 2015, he's won. That's the last, essentially 9 seasons. He's won 17 Grand Slams. So essentially, the last 9 seasons, he's essentially almost equaled what Federer did in his entire career.
So where do you think?
Pretty insane.
I see him being like Tom Brady and playing until he's 42, 43 years old.
I think he's going to get at least 2 next year, so he'll be at 26. I would go, the number that's in my head right now is 28. I feel like 28. I feel like 2 years from now, he has to have some type of drop, but maybe not. Who knows? Maybe he'll end up with like 32. But who knows? But Alcaraz is going to get better. These younger guys are going to get better. They're going to make it tougher for him. But yeah, I think 28 is what I would say that he's going to end up with. Nadal, yeah. I mean, if Nadal wins the French Open next year, that would be incredible. That would be like one of the best sports stories ever for him to do that. But yeah, Djokovic, I'm going to go 28.
Wow. Last question I have, Ivan, you may have another question or two, but where do you see them post-career? I read where Tony Godsick thinks that Federer, I'd have to agree that he's going to be like Arnold Palmer, where Arnold Palmer, through decades, he was endorsing products. He was just so beloved. I guess that was worldwide, but definitely here in the States. If you were to think, okay, down the road, I mean, I don't think like Sampras is not so connected with tennis. It's terrible what's happening with his wife and her health,
right?
With cancer. But what about your thoughts on down the road after tennis?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said about Federer is definitely right. I was, he did an event at the U.S. Open at the park that I play tennis at. And it was for Own, the shoe company that he's an investor in now. And it was such a good event. And he was there for what time did he get there? He probably got there at like 1:00 and left at like 5:30. So he was at this public park for like 4.5 hours. And then afterwards, there was an after party that he was at as well. And he was there for a good hour as well. I actually met him there. And he was very personable. He was chatting with everyone, taking pictures. He was playing ping pong with people. Like he was just another person. Like it was literally like I was standing at the ping pong table with him several feet away, and he's just playing ping pong, talking to people like if it was just anyone else. It was weird. It was very weird. I'm like, wait, that's Federer right there. Pretty surreal kind of thing, just to be like, this guy's just casually standing next to me playing ping pong. And that was actually, luckily enough, earlier in August, able to go to another event that he was at, also in New York. That was, which one was this owned as well? Which event was this? I think it was owned. And, I don't know. This was Uniqlo. And it was with a bunch of kids where he was giving instruction to kids and doing like a little clinic with a bunch of kids, probably between the ages of like 10 and 18. And he was just having a really good time. And he was interviewed afterwards. Kids were asking him questions, and you could just tell how happy this guy is to be retired and to be enjoying his life away from tennis. And that you could just tell he's very genuinely happy where he's at, and that he's like, I made the most of my career. My knee isn't cooperating anymore. You could see on the court when he's trying to move, like you can tell that he can't move. Like if he tries to run for a ball that's over anywhere beyond a couple of feet, he was struggling. Wow. So you can tell he says that his mom is still checking in on him to see how his knee is. So I think with Federer, he's definitely going to be that guy who's like going around the world and still interacting with people and endorsing products and being the spokesman. I think of the three of them, Federer will definitely be the one who people like just have the most connection with overall and see most aligning with like the sport itself, being a little bit transcendent within the sport as far as like just how he's remembered. And Nadal, I see Nadal being the one who's more like Sampras, where he's a little bit further removed from the sport. He has his academy, but he seems like this guy is very content, just going out, fishing, relaxing, enjoying himself, which, hey, can't argue with that. And then I see Djokovic as the one who's most likely to be a coach. I think if there's the three of them, I think Djokovic would be the one who's a coach. It seems like this guy has just got like a killer mentality, just nonstop, and just wants to win. And not that Nadal doesn't have that, but I just feel like in the long run, for whatever reason, I just feel like Djokovic is going to be the one who's going to be motivated to want to help a young player do what he did.
He's already offered Nick Kyrgios to be his coach for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's the student everyone wants, right?
Well, he does so much, as I said earlier, for Serbian tennis. But yeah, I think all three, when asked, are obviously class acts and be ambassadors for the game. But I agree with what you said. I can see Nadal being more like Sampras and being away from it at the same time. But if he's asked to contribute, he would.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, but Federer is Federer. I mean, of the three, even though Djokovic has gone on and done so much on the number side of it, Roger's the rock star.
Yeah, the way I would describe it is, I think if you want to like be motivated to play tennis, like you're probably going to look toward Federer and like how he played and the way that he played and just how smooth and effortless he was. I think if you want to look at like, you can look at all three, but I think the player you're going to look at most to like, all right, I'm actually going to get better at tennis and try to improve my game and look to see a player who's made improvements and how they've done that. You're going to look at Djokovic. And then I think if you're going to look at a player where you're going to say, all right, how am I going to navigate through a match mentally and give it my all? You're going to look at Nadal. So I think, again, everyone should be trying to look for whatever they can from all three.
I think from a business standpoint, with what's the name of the Japanese company, Uniqlo?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Uniqlo.
So it's Federer's about to retire. Djokovic was wearing that line of clothes, and now he's back he's with Lacoste. So it's
Right.
You just read, well, he got a 10-year deal, X amount of dollars, and he's going to be retiring in a year. I mean, that's how big he is. That's this is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like 30 million per year for 10 years.
Yeah.
Like absurd, insane.
With no, I said with being in a room with Federer being interviewed, and I think I've mentioned it on this podcast where I was writing for a magazine, and Federer wins a late night match in Arthur Ashe, and he's going to answer questions in 4 languages, but his father would be there with him, and he's won, so he's going to play again. So he showers and has a massage. He has food, so you have to wait a long time for him to come in, and just remember of the languages. I mean, Swiss German, French, and English were the best 3. So his German was not as good as the other 3, but he sat up and that was just unbelievable. Just how he was in those interviews.
I mean, all 3 of them are incredibly well spoken. They're all really intelligent. I mean, Federer, when he was interviewed at this event that I was at, I just couldn't believe how expansive and how much he elaborated on every answer. Just how it wasn't like he was trying to rush or trying to finish the questions. Like, he really was very thoughtful about every single question that he was asked, and just really went deep into every answer. And it was really impressive. And I think all 3 have done it. I mean, if you read a lot of their press conferences and you read a lot of their answers, they're really long. They're very long. And they really go at length to describe what they're talking about. I think it shows a certain passion. And I mean, there was a recent interview. I don't know how recent it was, but there was someone who interviewed, the famous Patriots coach Bill Belichick about a specific play that had happened in a game. And Belichick was so fascinated by what had happened with the specific play and how it had developed, that I believe that he went on for around 8 to 10 minutes on one answer about one specific play. Meanwhile, in the past, you couldn't get this guy to say a single word about anything. But with this, when you got the passion, he went on for 8 or 10 minutes from a guy who would never talk.
Well, it's fantastic to listen to you talk about your time in tennis and what you're doing in New York City. One thing, what about parents with these? You've obviously read so much about the big 3 and paid such close attention to it. Once again, I said family gets tennis players down the road. I mean, I think I could hold court talking about the family backgrounds of all 3 just based on what I've read. It's interesting when you're in tennis for a long period of time. The other day I was at a match where just sitting in the bleachers and I looked at this woman's face. I go, I know who she is. And I didn't know her, but I just knew the face. And it was Kathy Horvath. She was top 10 in the world. And, you're just sitting on the bleachers. And it's like, well, I can listen to what she has to say. I mean, she's sitting right next to me. And that's for something better to just listen sometimes than instead of introduce yourself. And but yeah, the parents. What comes to your mind? I guess we could sign off after that. What comes to your mind with the parents of the big 3?
Yeah, I mean, Federer. I know Federer said that he, attributes a lot to his mom and going back to South Africa a lot when he was growing up. Though he said that, he took a lot of his gifts from his dad. One thing, as far as parents, the one thing that came to mind is and I know this is not really directly answering your question, but the issue that Federer had with Djokovic's parents when, earlier in his career, where he always thought Djokovic's parents were, or at least in the one specific match, I should say, were just being too loud. And he had to tell them to be quiet. And And one thing I think about is, what for years Federer would play and really never look that much to his box. He wouldn't look to them. Whereas Nadal and Djokovic looked more so to their boxes. And like Murray's another example of someone who's always like looking to his box. And I wonder, this is not me saying I know, but I'm wondering more like where this came from. Clearly there's something in all three of them, where, they're obviously their parents have all done something right, And I'm sure for you as a tennis coach, I think for both of us, at least, I think a lot of it is just, allowing the player to be the player. I mean, for Djokovic, like his parents, like they didn't really have a tennis background. So I think when you have parents who do have a tennis background, maybe that is more detrimental because they think that they kind of know what really they think they don't know what they don't know. Or they think or that's not what I meant to say. They kind of think they know more than the coach. And I think that can kind of get in the way. So maybe for Djokovic, having parents who didn't have so much of a tennis background was helpful to him. And then Nadal's dad, not like Nadal's uncle. It's not like Tony Nadal was a professional tennis player. And I think that's also an interesting part of it where it's like, these coaches, a lot of the players think that they need some high level player where maybe they don't. It's not like if Djokovic played against Marion Vida, that would be, a match, right? So I think that's also an interesting part of it is how, who these players choose to be their coaches.
I think with parents, there's so much that parents can share, and it's such a journey with Lynette Federer, the book, I believe, again, Chris Bauer, where, I have to get my book straight. Anyway, I've read where Lynette Federer said, well, I was a volunteer. They asked her why she didn't coach her son. She said, no, I was a volunteer. I helped out kids as much as I could. But she used the word, but as a teacher, I was incompetent. But she was a late starter to tennis and ended up becoming a competitive player. I believe she represented Switzerland in the 45 and overs. But yeah, how the parents were on the same page. A few hiccups. I mean, whether one box being allowed. Years ago, the players, they shared the same box. I mean, times have changed, but yeah, as far as a book is concerned, I think that that's a big part of it, is the story behind the story with the parents. Roger says there's a lot of car rides home where there was no talking. I think parents being on the same page. And I think with just knowing soccer, the Nadal family, knowing pain, you always hear that Nadal grew up knowing that he had to suffer. The story where he one summer he spent all his time on the beach and he ended up losing to someone. I think it was in the 12s, and his father was trying to calm him down because he was so upset. And he said, "Hey, just look at how much fun you had at the beach this summer." And young Nadal said, "I would give that all back to win this match." There's just so many stories that the parents can share about what they were like when they were really young. And, where's that passion come from? And then, I'm always telling parents, the one thing you don't want to do with your child is disagree in front. The parents can disagree, but don't do it in front of the child. Let the kid go to bed and say, okay, let's go this way or that way. But don't let that conversation be ping pong where the kid's in the middle going, well, dad says this and mom says this and dad says this and mom says this. But Yvonne, why don't you say one or two last things? Maybe ask Nick a question. Nick, you could close it. What do you have, Yvonne, for us?
Yeah, we could close it on a fun note. We mentioned some special stats for Fed. Fed had never retired from a match. Nadal had never broken a racket. And
Mhm.
do you have another special stat that you think comes to mind that you could share?
Yeah. Let me think of the best ones off the top of my head. I mean, Federer had the uninterrupted streak, 237 weeks of being number one. Nadal had a streak of making 52 clay court semifinals in a row, or winning 52 clay court semifinals in a row. Excuse me. Um, Federer in 2000, in 2006, which is considered his best year, he was 92-5, lost 5 matches. The 4 were to Nadal. One was to Murray, and the one that he lost to Murray, he was, clearly pretty exhausted coming in. And then, but in 2005, he was 81-4, and the matches that he lost that year, just pull it up real quick. I'm on his page right now. The matches he lost that year were he lost to Safin at the Australian Open, which was 9-7 in the 5th set. He lost to Gasquet in Monte Carlo, which was 7-6 in the 3rd set. He lost Nadal in the French Open, which was 4 sets, and that was like his worst loss of the year. It was like a tight 4-set match. And then his final loss of the year was to Nalbandian in the Masters or the year-end finals, and that was 7-6 in the 5th set. So he was 81-4 and could have easily have won 3 of the 4 matches that he lost. And to me, that's still like one of the most incredible things. The guy won 81 matches, probably would have, and these were all late in tournaments. 2 were semis, 1 final, 1 quarter, but could have, easily have won 3 or 4 of these. The French Open one, I'm not, obviously not going to give to him. But I think Federer's dominance of also being in 18 of 19 Grand Slam finals at one stretch was obviously, that's absurd. And then, what Djokovic is doing now, the amount of top 10 wins that he has is pretty insane. But, there's so many incredible stats about all 3 of them. But the one about Nadal's clay court semifinal streak comes to mind. His record at the French Open, 112-3. I mean, that's insane. One stat that I researched a couple of years ago was that Federer, if you took the amount of aces Nadal has in his career and the amount of aces Djokovic had in his career, and you added them up and then took how many Federer had like 2,000 more than both of them combined. That was another fun one. Wow. But yeah, there's so many of those stats.
Encyclopedic.
Spend enough time on it now. Yeah.
Right, yeah, you've been living it. No, it's really great to have you on. Why don't you just give us a closing comment on the big 3, Nick, and we'll sign off. Thank you for your time, and I'm sure a lot of people get a kick out of everything you had to say. I mean, a lot of golden nuggets.
Appreciate you guys having me on. This is really fun. Love listening to this podcast, so I'm really happy that I was actually able to be on it. I would say as far as the big 3, I think everyone should just take time to go back, watch old matches, and really just appreciate it. Djokovic and Nadal are not going to be around forever. And at that point, we'll likely be yearning for the time that they were around and missing them. So let's appreciate them and try not to fight about them too much.
Oh, that's great, Nick. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. This has been a great podcast. And again, the golden nuggets for the treasure chest of those people looking to learn more about tennis.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Nick, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Nick, you got to come down to Wintergreen. Hang out with us.
Yeah, no, I would love to.
Same thing. I need to make it up to court 16. I know we talked about it one time with maybe this year's U.S. Open.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. We'd love to do that.
All right. Thanks again. Good night.
Good night.
All right. Good night. Bye, guys.
That was awesome. The big 3.
Yeah. That was a good conversation.
No, he's just got it on the tip of his tongue. I mean, that's passion for you. It's just, and just to tell kids, I mean, come on, let's study Roger. Let's study Rafa. Let's study Novak. live at this time and to have to watch those players. And that's the beauty of, so much of it, I would say most of it, so much of it's on film. But there are those stories to dig for. And I really think it's like Mike Agassi wrote a book before Andre Agassi wrote a book. And when players are that great, I would love to see the parents of the big three book come out. The do's and don'ts of parenting. That was last week, but so much. Anyway, good night. Adios, amigos.
Adios.
Thank you for listening.